Hello, and welcome to the power rankings of the TRL Season 1 for the Aqua breed division. My name is Zand, and I will be doing your power rankings today. Super excited to be here. I appreciate Habane for reaching out to me and asking me to rank these teams. I think the rules are relatively straightforward. Standard Terra attacks, only one Pokemon who's a Terra Captain can be above 15 points, so you can't like double down on expensive Terra Captains and just spend a lot. So I like that rule a lot. I noticed Revival Blessing with Lepa is banned. I think that means Revival Blessing at base is allowed, which is kind of cool, something you don't see very often. Accuracy, lowering moves except Muddy Water are all banned. That's fair enough. I feel like that's specifically to make Belly Bolt a little bit better. But otherwise, I like these rules a lot. I've glanced over the teams. I like the teams a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through one at a time. There will be timestamps at the bottom. I'm just going to analyze the teams, what I like about them, maybe some holes in the draft, whether it be typing, speed, moves, or just pieces in general that may be missing. I don't think any of the teams are bad. I'm going to say I like all of the teams. None of them stood out to me as missing a whole lot. So everybody did a good job. And I guess I should start with, my name is Zand. I've been in Draft League for over 10 years at this point, which is probably something I shouldn't be admitting out loud. I left for a long time, but I'm back and playing pretty regularly now. I feel like I have a lot of knowledge in the way Draft League is played. And if you enjoy this video, we should have another one. I'm going to self-promote just a little bit. Should have a video about draft types coming up sometime this week, and then in the next few weeks I'm going to continue making some kind of draft hell video. So if you're newer to the draft scene, I'm not sure the experience of everybody in this league, but if you're newer to the scene, definitely look forward to checking those out. And of course you can reach out to me about your team if you want to make transactions. If you're not sure where to go with your team, feel free to reach out to me on Discord or in the comments section below, and I'm happy to talk to you about it. But other than that, we'll get straight into the first team. All right, and for the first team, we have the Santa Maria Absols, coached by Felix, I believe. And what a team to start out. So assuming the teams are in draft order, you round one-did Spectrier, which is, in my opinion, one of the best round ones you can get. I love this Pokemon. It's so good. Rounded it out with a lot of really solid wheels, like the Mints into the King Gambit. You got your bulky core with the Ansi Vaporeon, a little bit of sauce spam, an unburden user to go with your terrain, and then some removal at the very end, which honestly, that's fine. If this removal was still on the board that late, that's amazing, honestly. That's better than you can usually ask for in leagues in Scarlet and Violet. So as far as pros go, no one is going to like prepping for this team because you have so much damage and so many archetypes that people have to deal with. Spectrier alone forces a ton of dark types and potentially normal types, as well as Terra Darks and normals. So normally you want something to punish that, and you have Sneasler as a fantastic breaker, and then you have some other mons that can run fighting coverage. You've got the King Gambit with low kick, and now that I'm looking at it, I can't remember. I don't think a Spothra gets any fighting coverage at base, and Didi might get Focus Blast. But other than that, oh, you've got Diancie with the Body Press also. So you got really good ways to support Spectrier. Screen setting is not a problem at all for you. You've got multiple users, and you have just a bunch of fun modes. So I think Indeedee in its own right is not the best Pokemon in the world, but I've used it several times at this point, and I know that although it's not great, it facilitates other Pokemon to do great things. So it really helps a Spothra deal like crazy damage with like a Choice Specs Tinted Lens, or sorry, not Tinted Lens, Choice Specs like Opportunist, you know, if you don't want to run Speed Boost, or just Spec Speed Boost, you know, because you're not getting any weaker. So I really like that. It's a little anti-synergy if you run like a setup of Spothra, because you're going to be Calm Minding, so you don't really need Psychic Seed, and the terrain's eventually going to run out, but you know, then you can just run a Spothra, not Indeedee. Sneasler, obviously Unburden. Throw Swords Dance on this guy, give it dual stab, and it's going to break pretty much anything that's not a poison type. So I like that a lot. And then your speed is kind of crazy, honestly. I've seen a lot of SV draft teams, and your team is one of the fastest I've seen. You got that benchmark base 130 that's really good. You really filled out these speeds decently well. Obviously, Spothra is not going to be sitting at 105 very often. It's going to boost way past that. Your other 100s are going to be boosting. So yeah, just an incredible team. And then the pivoting. So Vaporeon is a baton pass pivot into any of these threats. It's just going to be amazing for you. Talonflame is a U-turn pivot on flying weaks to help scare them out and get other things in. I think it's great, honestly. I think you've got really good bones here. Vaporeon Wish, if you wanted to run bulkier 1 week, you could help keep like a bulky Mince, a bulky Diancie, even Toedscruel healthy. So big fan of all of that. I think this is a great team. I would like to use this team. It covers all the proper types. You know, it's super solid. If I got into things that I noticed, I think this team is going to be relying very heavily on Toedscruel to do a lot of things, which Toedscruel in its own right is not a bad Pokemon. Is a little bit nerfed by its own ability, but you know, that's okay if you're running mainly like rapid spin and attacks on it anyway. The issue, I think, is this is your entire electric type switch in here. Unless you run like Terra Ground on Salamence or Terra Grass, which are both still weak to ice, so it's not fantastic, then Toedscruel is your electric type switch in, always. So if you run into electric types that get any kind of coverage for this guy, it's going to be a little bit annoying because you're just going to get Volt switched on a lot all game. Also, Toedscruel is pretty much your entire backbone in terms of hazards, because you're not really going to want to run rocks on Gambit. Diancie's not coming to every game, and when it does, it doesn't always have room for rocks if you want to run like Trick Room or, you know, set up anything like that. So Toedscruel has both of your hazards. Obviously, Sneasler, if you're running like offensive Sneasler, which is its bread and butter, then you're not going to run T-Spikes on it either. So a lot of times you're going to want your hazards on Toedscruel. You're going to want Rapid Spin on Toedscruel. Toedscruel is also your only knockoff user, which is pretty interesting. I know you have King Gambit, so that tends to limit knockoff on a team regardless, because your dark type doesn't have knock, which is unfortunate. But still, your item removal, you know, all of that, a lot of your status is also kind of limited to Toedscruel. I know you've got Scald Willow here, and Dire Claw, obviously doing Dire Claw things. But outside of that, I think Toedscruel is just being asked to do a lot here, and you have a lot of teammates you would rather bring to a game, I feel. So that's one thing. I noted your speed really good earlier, almost too good, I would say. Like, Trick Room is not insanely good in singles, but your Trick Room answers being King Gambit Diancie are solid. But if you don't bring those, or if you don't bring one of them to a game, then you're struggling pretty hard with Trick Room with all these high speeds. The other thing that having so much speed does is if your opponents have a bunch of base 70s, let's say, they're just going to run max bulk. They're going to go, okay, I can't run anything up here. I'm going to run a little bit in case Vaporeon creeps me. I'm going to run a little bit in case King Gambit creeps me. Otherwise, I'm running max bulk. So you're going to have to deal with a lot of super bulky Pokemon. Now, do you have some of the best tools out there to deal with bulky Pokemon? Yes. But just something to keep in mind that that's what's going to be going on. Otherwise, though, I'm a big fan of this team. I don't see any like major flaws. I don't see any major weaknesses. So if we go to, let me see if I got the tier list here. I do have the tier list here. So the Absols, Santa Maria Absols, I would put you solidly in A. I really do like this team. I think it's slightly unconventional. Obviously, you just have a bunch of breakers up top here, but not the typical layout I see. Oh, one more just knock, and I don't think it's a bad thing. You only have one Terra Captain in Salamence, and Salamence is a fantastic Terra Captain. Terra Fly, Terra Dragon, any offensive type really is amazing on it. If you wanted to run a bulkier support, you have, you know, ample options there. Terra Water, I think, would be fantastic on it. Even, I feel like it could even run Terra Stellar with Dragon Dance if you really just needed your coverage to break once. But yeah, I love this as a Terra Captain, but it being your only cap means that Salamence is kind of forced to come every week because of that extra utility, and that limits your options otherwise because you don't have that secondary cap to prep for. But at the same time, you don't have like any like glaring low tiers that really want the Terra cap. So I think it's okay. I just think it also limits your building a little bit. Otherwise, love the team. And yeah, we'll move straight on to the next one. Okay, next up, we have the Mike Tyrogues, coached by Pochop. And this is a super interesting team. I'm sitting here trying to think of initial analyses for it. I will say I really like the speed tier breakdown. I think Electrode's always a cool thing to have because it does pressure like base 130s with like making them want to run either more bulk or Scarf, things like that. And especially with Terra, it's very threatening. And then your speed tiers otherwise are filled out really well. Number 2 pick, Terra Enamorous Incarnate. I gotta tell you, this is personal bias. I am not sold on this thing. I have played multiple of them. I don't think I've ever drafted it myself. I've drafted the Ethereum form. But it's kind of stuck either running choice scarf sets or running like odd sets that don't really fit its like stat profile. This thing is an offensive nightmare. Like, it is crazy strong, but it's also like, I guess actually, now that I'm looking at it, if you drafted just normal Enamorous, like no Terra, that would be a bit of an issue. With Terra, this thing is kind of a nightmare because it can Terra out of its weaknesses, it can Terra to get better coverage. Most importantly, it can just Terra Fairy, and what is switching in on it? So now that I'm seeing the Terra, I like it a little more. I think it is kind of important for this thing to be a Terra Cat because it doesn't really want to run boots either. So having it be able to Terra out of its rocks weaknesses is very good. But this team, I would say, a little bit similar to the last one in that there's a crazy amount of breaking power up top. There's some utility in the bottom, some hazards. And then the middle is a little different, I would say. These two Pokemon stand out to me as, I guess this is a crazy defensive core. But otherwise, does not speak as much to the crazy kind of hopper offense that other team could have went. But definitely more modes on this team, I would say. So I do like the Urshifu. Urshifu and Blastoise is going to make everybody bring their grass types against you and their electric types. So you definitely are going to be relying a lot on the drill for the electrics, and then for your grasses, I guess you'll have Terra Fire Enamorous as an option. If you trust yourself to hit hurricanes, you'll have the Noivern. I guess you also have Terra Blast Flying if you chose to go that route. And then you've got the Skeledirge to help you break down grasses. But unfortunately, if they're Terra grasses, then they can Terra Leech Seed and kind of be a nuisance to you in that way. But yeah, I think this team is very much baiting grass types to come against it with these three in particular. I know one of them is a Terra Cap, and you've got decent answers to grasses. You got the Cleavor, of course, as well. Problem being, this whole team can't come to every battle. So I think a lot of these pieces are very important to a lot of battles. So we're going to have to see like what you're willing to bring versus what you're willing to leave off to deal with teams each week, because I feel like your pieces are kind of broken out a bit. Not that it's a bad thing, because your opponent has to prep for like a wide breadth of options you could bring, because you could bring like super bulky with like a bulkier Exca, Noivern, you know, a flip turn like support Blastoise, and then obviously these two are like semi-stall on their own. So definitely some cool modes this team could go, and then hyper offense, just lead Cleavor, run these four, and just start blasting. Like I like the options you have with this team a lot. I would say it's lacking a bit in the hazards department. No spikes feels a little bad. It's going to make people run less removal against you, because if they can handle stealth rocks, then they're not really going to be too concerned with it. Weezing, and in my experience at least, rarely has room for T-spikes, and it's also like a T-spike absorber that wants levitate half the time. So a little bit passive, but you have a lot of good options to get out of Weezing and put more pressure on opponents, so it's not the end of the world. I just think it's kind of, it wants to do a lot here, but it's kind of confined to just the defensive role it normally has to take, which typically means you need Pain Split, you need Willow, and you need some kind of threatening coverage to not let things just sub on you infinitely. Your removal, very solid, double spin, and I think both these mons still get defogged. Something I should preface is this document is kind of nat deck, so some of the moves that got removed from Pokemon may still show here. It's just a matter of this document. Good pivoting, I like a lot. No knockoff at all on this team is interesting. I thought, I could have sworn Cleavor, maybe it doesn't get knock. I could have sworn it did, but I guess not. No knock is definitely a little obnoxious, because Urshifu really doesn't like hitting onto Rocky Helmet, neither does Excadrill. So not being able to get rid of a helmet with any of your mons is going to be a little frustrating. And then the helmet is also really good into Cleavor to chip its sash away if you lead sash it. So a few things kind of to note there. I think knock would be very beneficial to this team. And then this team doesn't have a psychic, and while psychic is far from a required type to have in draft, I think the utility psychic brings is really nice. So if you see like on your team sheet down here, you don't have a trick room setter, which is totally fine with this team. You don't really have a trick room mode. You don't have trick. You may have switcheroo. I will check just to make sure. Oop, that's ally switch. That probably doesn't matter. Let's see if you have any switcheroo users. You do have Noivern. Okay, so you do have one item swapping like disruption, and then your screens are relatively very limited. I don't think you're going to be running light screen on Cleavor every week. Reflect Electrode could make sense, and then Blastoise is not really trying to set screens either. So I would say like some of your like setup you could potentially be trying to do with these top three is a little bit limited just because you don't have a lot of support for it. But at the end of the day, I think that's okay. I also think the opposite of the last team, all three of these guys really want to use that Terra. So without the Terra, they lose a lot of value. And for your first pick, you're almost always wanting it to be a Terra captain. So I would say like 9 times out of 10, an Amorous is going to want the Terra, but you're going to want to bring Noivern or Electrode for specific matchups. And then if they don't get the Terra, it becomes a mind game. And hopefully that's a mind game that you're in control of and you can actually take advantage of, because I do think it's pretty solid. Overall though, I think this is a very good team. I think it's just lacking a couple of little pieces, but overall this is definitely a team that could make playoffs, win the whole thing. I would definitely place it at it's a logo. I would place it at B, but I would call it a B plus because I think it's a super solid team. Your removal's fantastic. Just a couple of little things here and there, but overall I do really like it. All right, for our third team, excuse the tab, we have the Virginia Victinis and Red Strike Spain with a very powerful looking team. Round 3, Dragapult, never a bad move. Some really solid bulky pivots and bulky utility and things like the Slowking and the Rillaboom. I love a Sandy Shocks on a team. I think it's relatively underrated. It looks like you got it pretty late into the draft, unless this is like a trade, which if it didn't get picked up at all in the initial draft, that's kind of crazy too. And then some very interesting Terra captains, I gotta say, in Terra Heatran, Terra Moltres G, and then Terra Hitmontop. Something I was looking at this and I'm trying to, this one is a little harder for me to get a grip on because there's a lot of pieces I really like here, but I don't know if I'm fully getting the synergy of everything going on. So I understand Rillaboom, very solid pick with the grassy terrain into Heatran because you're making earthquakes weaker and you're giving it passive healing. Super solid, and it's also helping Wheezing out if you run non-levitate, so you're giving it that. But you also have 2 terrain setters and no unburdened Pokemon and no Pokemon that really take full advantage of those terrains. And you could get creative, so you could run something like a Grassy Seed Moltres G, and it helps it get set up because it suddenly becomes super bulky on both sides. You've got the Terra option open, so I think that's a really solid potential for the team to kind of synergize. You got the Slowking with the Chilly Reception into Satitan. I would have loved to have seen this thing be a Terra Captain over Hitmontop, but I'm guessing, I think it was 3 extra points to make this a Terra Cap Hitmontop, probably not that much. So I understand the issue there. So I'm seeing some synergy, but I'm just a little bit, I'm scratching my head a little bit trying to decide how I feel about this team, because there's definitely pieces I love. I'm surprised Terra Moltres G wasn't more expensive because I know you're limited to only 1 technical high tier Terra. So the fact that this guy is not counted as one of those is crazy to me because I love Galarian Moltres and I always wanted to run it as Terra. I've only ever run it non-Terra. So I think this is going to be like a kingpin Pokemon. If I had to make a few notes, little lacking on hazards. You're really only ever going to have rocks on the Heatran, and then you can run a hazard lead Sandy Shocks. Kind of the good and bad thing about Sandy Shocks is its move pool is so tiny that you're more often than not going to have room for either screens or hazards, because other than that, you're really just running Volt Switch, Discharge, Thunderbolt, Earth Power, maybe Power Gem on an occasion, maybe Flash Cannon on rare occasions. But otherwise, this guy always has freedom of moves, and just its stats and the amount of items it can run is really solid. So I think normally I would kind of knock you for not many hazards, but Sandy Shocks is such a reliable hazard setter that I don't hate it. I think it's really solid. Wheezing, kind of the same as I said about the last person. It rarely has room for T-Spikes, but when it does, it's good enough at it. And I think Wheezing G is more likely to not need to run Levitate. Maybe if you needed to resist Ground and Dragon for whatever reason, you could have Levitate. But I do like neutralizing gas on this guy quite a bit more, at least into certain teams, of course, you know, super team dependent. But being able to stay on the ground and get some, healing from that grassy surge is pretty nice. I'm not the biggest fan of the removal options on this team. Maybe I'm just a Hitmontop doubter, but I think when I think Rapid Spin, I think Hitmontop and Fortress. Those are the first two Pokemon that always come to mind when I think of Rapid Spin. Problem is, Hitmontop has not withstood the test of time very well, and in Generation 9, it struggles to find room on teams. I know Intimidate is a good ability to have. You have a ton of special bulk on this team, a ton of AV users. Well, not a ton of special bulk, but you have some decent special bulk here, I would say. So Intimidate is a good thing to have. You also have the Technician if you want to run more offensive sets. You've got things like Triple Axle. You boost your own Rapid Spins, which is funny. Get boosted Mach Punches, things like that. It's pretty cool. Unfortunately, this is your spinner. You're going to find yourself looking at 5 of these Pokemon, I would imagine, on a given day. Or 6 of these 7 Pokemon. And say, which 2 of these do I want to leave out so that I can actually get rid of hazards this week? And I think that's going to be a hard call. Maybe your opponent has 2 or 3 really solid grass types, so maybe you don't want to bring Shocks, maybe you don't like Rilla, maybe you don't like Wheezing some weeks, it can get set up on by something. Then you'll have room for Hitmontop. Otherwise, I think it's going to be a struggle to fit that removal, and you're going to be forced to run Defog, and if you're running Hazards Shocks, then you're not really going to like to Defog. So that's just a little thing that stands out to me. You've got some decent pivoting options. I do really like the Chilly Reception on this team because you can get things in, get them healed up. Slowking, being able to regenerate up is always nice. Regenerator is one of the absolute most busted abilities in draft in general. So I think it's incredible getting things like Dragapult in to do Dragapult things, have a lot of fun with Dragon Dance, choice items, help, and you can just even keep pivoting around with that. So big fan of that. Heatran, so with this team, something that I think is both good and bad. I think you're going to benefit from waiting to Terrasilize as long as possible. Because Heatran, obviously, its resistance profile is one of the best things about it. Kind of the same with Galarian Moltres. It's fantastic. It's your only ghost switch in, really. And it is a fantastic base typing, but sometimes it does want something else. So I noticed a lot of times when I ran it, I really wanted it to be like Terra Electric, Terra Ground, not only to give it extra coverage, but to help avoid paralysis, because that would really slow it down, obviously. And it made me want to fit like sub and things on it more. So I think with a Terra type like that is really nice, but you also have options like Poison and Steel, where people aren't going to be clicking Earthquake on you if you're not Terrasilized yet. So you can always play those mind games. I really, really, really like this pick. I'll be honest. I'm a big fan. So I think it would benefit you greatly to hold your Terrasilization as long as possible, especially if you bring multiple caps to a game. I think you'll find a lot of benefit there. So Titan, it's good to have the option to sweep. If someone doesn't have good ice resist, then you can just bring this Chilly Reception into it, do a ton of damage. With Band, I guess you could run Belly Drum, but I know this thing's super bulky, but also the coverage is just not great, and it's pretty slow outside of snow. But I think definitely decent. I like having that. I wish there was an Unburdened Pokemon here. That's the big thing standing out to me right now. And this team is also just a little bit limited on utility. You don't have an Encore user, no Switcheroo. Do you have a Trick? I'm going to keep going back and forth on this toggle because I have one too many moves, or one too few slots, I guess. Okay, well, Slowking's not really wanting to run Trick. I guess you technically could. But I will say, lacking just a little bit of utility. Encore, some of these Pokemon would love a free turn to set up, especially Moltres. So things like Encore would be super nice. You got decent status, though, with between Wheezing, you got the Sandy Shocks that can discharge Para some things, Slowking, Dragapult, kind of the kings of spreading status as well, if you chose to run them like that, and then Heatran with its infinite burns. Overall, I'm a big fan. The more I've talked about this team, the more I've talked myself into liking it quite a bit. I think, unfortunately, most of your damage is going to have to come from choice items on Pokemon that may not always run them. I know Rilla and Polt can run them. I think you're going to be seeing yourself running them more often this season because you don't have a whole lot of physical breaking power outside of these two. These two I'm not counting because I feel like they're your niche picks, but you have plenty of special breaking power, decent special setup. I just think a little lacking in physical outside of Polt and Rilla, which is okay. I just think it's something to note that they're going to have to run very offensive more often than you might want to see them running offensive. But overall, I do like the team. I am going to also put it, which team is it? The Victinis. I'm going to also put it in B with the asterisk that I do think it is a B+ team. I do like it the more I talk about it, I think there's a couple things I would change about it. Mainly just throw an Unburdened Mon on here somewhere, maybe get rid of him on top, get a better spinner. But that's only if you're having trouble with the team. If the team does well, then great, I'm happy for you, and I would not be surprised to see this team make it far. All right, next up we have the Bus Down Braxiens, coached by Victinis. I think is how to pronounce that. It's quite the word. And this team is pretty incredible with hazards. Look, these two alone, spikes are always going up. And if your opponent hazard stacks you, too bad, they're on your side. Now you've got a Cinderace, you've got a great T-Spiker in the Tentacruel. Just a lot of solid pieces here, and probably one of the scariest Terra Captains I've ever seen in Keldeo. I think it's already very strong, but giving this thing the ability to blast Terra Water and Terra Fighting moves that are even stronger, and occasionally maybe you want to run coverage, but usually I see this thing just Terra Water every week, and there's not a whole lot opposing teams can do against it, so I do like that a lot as well. I think this team, Gliscor, this could have been your only hazard setter, and I would have said your hazard game was totally fine, because I think Gliscor is amazingly self-sufficient at setting hazards. Tentacruel is one of the most reliable spinners in the game, so great job there. And then Cinderace, obviously hazard removal is no issue, and I would almost say that Cinderace completely scares off opponents trying to hazard stack you 9 times out of 10. So Tentacruel may even be overkill for hazard removal, which is pretty funny. This team has absolutely fantastic pivoting potential. There's double U-turn on Meowscarada plus Cinderace, and things like flip turn on Tentacruel just let you move around a lot. This is, I think, the second team now I've seen without any electric, which is totally okay. Just a little interesting to see that no one is opting to go with an electric type on their draft. This team is also double fighting types that can Terra out of their fighting types, which is pretty interesting. I think these two do different enough things that they're both really solid Terra Captains in their own right. If Keldeo is going to want a Terra every game, honestly, but in the off chance you don't want it, Terracon Kelder could go, honestly, could go Terra Fighting and just do insane damage with Mach Punch, Drain Punch. But you could also do something like a Terra Poison, and suddenly you're incredibly bulky, hard to break, and you can run like a bulk up set, or Terra, anything really. Sky's the limit. Any kind of defensive typing that you think fits and maybe gives you a little coverage, things like Terra Grass to help you break water types, because otherwise Meowscarada is your sole way to break water types, which is a little scary. But I think you have okay options around that. I just think waters and grasses are going to give you some issue. Cinderace threatens grasses decently well enough, but Gliscor tends to struggle to hit them. Keldeo struggles to hit them. Tentacruel has poison moves, but rarely is it doing a crazy amount of damage. I would say a couple things I want to note on this team. Cinderace and Meowscarada do very similar things. They are both fast, they both pivot, they both punch really hard. I don't know if they both really are called for on one team. I think there's a little bit of redundancy between these two. I think Jirachi also kind of does a similar thing. Obviously, it can run a more utility type of set. It can run like special setup if it really wants. But at the end of the day, it also just appreciates the Choice Scarf and a U-turn, Another thing that I kind of stood out to me, the triple base 100 speed tier. So normally you want to really flex these speed tiers out as much as you can. So triple stacking 1 it can be bad. It's not always bad, and especially if it's fast, it's not that bad. Problem being that this team jumps from Gliscor at 95 all the way down to Conkeldurr and Dusknoir at 45. Which just means, like I said, with another team, any Pokemon base 90 or below, unless it's running a Choice Scarf, it's not going to care. It's going to run max bulk, max health, some defense, maybe. And it's going to be a lot harder for your team to do any breaking. That being said, this team is also incredibly reliant on Keldeo for immediate special offense. This team, if you look at physical only, can run special, but base 100s are not what they used to be. Physical only. Tentacruel's it can, obviously run special, but it's not doing any kind of damage really most of the time. Comfey needs time to set up for it to do any kind of damage as well, and physical only. So there's definitely a lack of a special attacker here outside of Keldeo. So this Keldeo is going to be doing so much heavy lifting, and it's going to feel incredibly bad if you miss a single Specs Hydro Pump in the season, and I think you're going to be kind of forced to run things like that. So that worries me a little bit. I think very solid to have this as your special breaker. I just think it's asked to do a whole lot here. Similarly, things like Calm Mind, Jirachi, and Comfey kind of do the exact same thing. They're stopped by the exact same thing, so not toxic. I guess toxic on Comfey versus, you know, whatever. But Paralysis looks really strong into this team outside of Glasscore. So if there's like non-electric types like Stun Spore users or something that want to come against you, your team really gets nerfed hard once status starts being spread around. You know, you've got burn absorbers in these two, which isn't too bad. You've got Glasscore that's going to be a status absorber in general. But if it's something that can spread status and threaten Glasscore, it's going to be a little bit rough. Otherwise, though, I do think this team has a lot of good potential. I just think there's a little bit of redundancy. Speeds are a little kind of all staggered in one little area. Otherwise, though, I do really enjoy this team. I think also Dusknoir is just an odd pick. I think you've already got your slow, physically offensive Pokemon, threatens things a lot, which is fine. I think Conkeldurr is a great Pokemon, doesn't need to Terra most of the time, which is good for Keldeo. I just don't really know what Dusknoir is providing for this team. That's something like one of these types, maybe that's missing maybe a Dragon and Electric, something. I'm not sure exactly how much Dusknoir costed, but I think you could get more utility maybe out of another special breaker in the low tiers. I know there are a few hanging out. Things like Arboliva are very cheap. Might help you out some. That's just the first one that comes to mind. I know there's more down there, but definitely another special breaker would be much appreciated on this team, and preferably something to either fill out the speed or get something even slower so you can have a like really solid Trick Room answer. I was looking a little at these type weaknesses. You know, these kind of light up when things look a little bad. I think these two are kind of faulty. I know you only have one flying switch in and realistically only one psychic switch in Jirachi, but two of the weaknesses in both of these categories can tear out of the weakness, so it's not as bad as it looks. I do think the ground weakness is a little sus. I know a Mamoswine would love to see this team. It gets revenged by half this team, but also if it comes in on half of the things here, then it really threatens a lot. And just a lot of the type coverage that I think likes to be run on a team like this is a little bit redundant. Like Cinderace usually really likes fighting as secondary quote-unquote stab because it has Libero. You already have two fightings. So I don't know. I think it's solid. I think it's definitely a team that could go to playoffs, win the whole thing. I just think there are a few things that kind of stand out to me as pieces that are missing. So I will still put it, excuse that, I would still put it in B tier, but I would put an asterisk that it's definitely at least a little bit below these two, at least in my opinion. Next up, we have the Orcutt Ursarings, coached by Lee Orion, probably Orion. And I am a big fan of this team. I'm still trying to get a read on it, but I can tell you, if you've got a Terra Hydrapple on your team, I'm a fan. I'm going to be a fan the whole time. In fact, just the double regen core of these two that can run Trick Room together, it is gross having these two as your Terra Captain core. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And yeah, probably one of the most consistent Trick Room cores you could have on a team as well. So yeah, big fan of that. Iron Valiant, I'm not completely sold on in draft because I think one Resist Berry and this thing just gets obliterated. But I do think on this team, you have very defined roles. So you have Valiant, Chi-Yu, and Zapdos as your breakers. You've got Hydrapple and Reuniclus as your kind of special like sponges that could also run physically defensive if they wanted, alongside Empoleon and Donphan. So very good defensive core here. Empoleon can heal. Donphan's really the only one that can get chipped. But even then, you know, that's totally okay because if you have enough breakers to force progress on your opponent. And then these two, I think, are two of the best low-tier Pokemon you could pick up. I know neither of them are a Terra Captain, but I think that's totally fine because they both have very defined roles as well. They both look really good into specific matchups. So you've got Quillfish if your opponent has weak hazard removal. I really like the Spike, Toxic Spike. Intimidate's very nice to have. Big fan of Quillfish because it can also flip turn around, get you into some of these super threatening Pokemon that don't like switching in, like the Zapdos, the Chi-Yu, Iron Valiant. Similarly with Rotom, you have triple immunity in ground and fighting and normal, which is really solid. You can burn things, you have the pivoting. Ghost coverage is always nice to have on a team, so huge fan of that. And then I just think this bulky core is just getting to me. I love it so much. The 4 here are going to be so annoying for teams to break because it's like, oh, anything I bring into Empoleon, one of Reuniclus or Hydrapple is just going to absorb. And then if they don't absorb it at base, they just tear it into a type. This is not a team I would want to prep for, because having something that switches in on these 3 without being passive into the bulk is just, ugh, that would be a headache. As far as hazard game goes, I think Donphan as your singular removal, because I don't think Rotom and Empoleon get defogged this gen, is totally fine. Donphan is going to come most weeks. It can run spin. I think Heavy Duty Boots and Sturdy is a fantastic failsafe to have to a lot of matchups, so no worries there. Honestly, Donphan fits a lot of teams. I think a lot of things here are either, you know, make or break in specific matchups, and you can leave a lot of these at home to fill your slots a little easier. So like Zapdos, there's matchups where it has absolutely no switch ins. There's other matchups where people have like 2 really solid physically defensive, like a poison and a fairy, right? So suddenly it's not doing that much. And that's okay. You can fill in with Reuniclus to, you know, take advantage of that. You can fill in with Rotom, you know, if your opponent's like really banking on you not bringing a good ground immune. Things like, I don't want to keep saying Mamoswine, but it would threaten this team a lot if not for something like Rotom. I know it doesn't really want to take the ice type moves, but I think you have really solid answers here. Yeah, I'm just honestly a fan. I would say one thing, your top speed at 116 in the Valiant. Obviously you have Booster, which puts you through the moon with your speed, but then a Choice Scarf Pokemon faster than that is always going to outrun and potentially KO Valiant. It's not great. And then Chiyu and Zapdos, probably Chiyu, Zapdos, Rotom at that. 3 of the most notorious Choice Scarf users in the game, so you're probably going to have Scarf on at least one of these more often than not. So that patches up speed a little bit, but that does incentivize your opponents to bring Scarfers against those that can potentially threaten an OHKO on them. So just something to keep in mind. This team's breaking power into waters. You have Hydrapple, but all waters get ice moves, so you're really going to have to run Terra on the Hydrapple a lot, or just like AV and a ton of bulk. To be able to actually threaten and KO those water types, because Rotom, you know, at the end of the day, it's not doing that much damage and it's not coming to that many games, but that's okay. As far as resistances go, I think you're looking pretty okay. Chiyu is your only ghost switch in is not fantastic. I think ghost spam could be pretty hard for this team to deal with, but honestly, if you've got an AV on one of these 2 guys, Reuniclus, Cantera, and you're not looking too bad into it just because ghost is relatively weak if it's not super effective. Bird switch-ins, once again, you can Terra out of your bird weakness on Drapple. I know it likes Terra Steel, so not a big deal there. Otherwise, I think it's like pretty solid. Fairy is a weakness. Yeah, I guess Fairy plus Electric actually does threaten this team quite a bit, because you've got your Fire type does not like resist Fairy, and then your 2 Pokemon that do resist Fairy don't want to take any electric moves, so I guess that's one kind of coverage to take care of. But otherwise, I mean, you've got 5 knock users, you've got just enough pivoting for me to not call it out, decent enough utility everywhere. So overall, really solid team. Some weaknesses, I would say, I think the big thing is going to be fast Choice Scarfers being brought against you. Maybe Trick Room. No one wants to bring Trick Room against Reuni Hydrapple though. So I think honestly the game plan most games is going to be use these 2 as much and as early as possible to wear things down. Once things are worn down, one of Zapdos, Chiyu, or Valiant comes in and cleans, and I think everybody else plays support, and you're having a good time. So honestly, big fan of this team. I keep going to the wrong tab. Ignore the random ad in the bottom. I don't know what's going on there. Sorry, Tier Maker won't even let you like interact with it. Don't click the ad. Tier Maker won't even let you interact with it if you don't have ads running, so that's annoying. Anyway, I would put this team in the A tier, honestly. Is it better than these teams? I'm not sure. I think all of these teams are very close. So I'm going to put it here for now. I'm going to put it beginning of B if it'll let me. I'm going to put it here for now, because I think this team, just the double regen core alone, puts it like a step above the other ones we've talked about. So honestly, no, I'm putting in A. Sorry, we are moving up in the world. I think this team is going to be super obnoxious if it's like pivoted around right. Every time Chiyu comes in, it gets a KO. Every time Zapdos comes in, it gets a KO. And then Valiant's just sitting there like rubbing its hands in the background, waiting to clean up. Yeah, I think a textbook great team. All right, next up we have the California Krooks coach by Magic Potato 91. And we see our first weather team, which, if I'm not mistaken, I skimmed through the draft board. We're going to go through it a little at the halfway point of these PRs. But I skimmed the draft board, and I did not see that much weather actually getting taken. So that's an immediate plus to this team. The other thing about this team is it's definitely not, like, defined by its weather, because there's definitely a little bit of anti-synergy here. Like, setting sun means all fire coverage is going to KO Scizor and Weavile, not just most of it. And you're also weakening your own Quackleval with the sun, so I think it's definitely not going to be a every week Ninetales shows up and does something team. It's going to be a when you really want Raging Bolt or Leafeon to do work, then it's a Ninetales week. So that is just something stood out to me instantly. Round 1, Terra Raging Bolt. I mean, I don't really have to say anything else. This is one of the best Pokemon to be a Terra Cap. I think you're going to see it Terra Electric, Terra Fairy more often than not. You can have the Terras that resist ground on occasions, things like Terra Grass, even Terra Bug, I think could be decent on it to help it handle specific matchups, because nothing is wanting to come in on Electric and Dragon moves unless your opponent has like a Terra Pokemon with an Electric immune ability, something like a Kilowattrel or a Jolteon. Then they can run Terra Fairy and suddenly they're immune to your dual stab, so you might have to get a little creative on that. Most of the time, though, Raging Bolt is going to do just a ridiculous amount of work. And then you've got decent bulk in the Tinglu, the Unbreakable Wall, alongside Pheasantipity and Mesprit to help provide some support to your team. One thing I would say, you do have reliable recovery in Pheasantipity and Quackleval. Other than that, your bulk, like Tinglu, Scizor, and Raging Bolt, don't have good ways of healing themselves. And I like that your way of patching that up was 2 of the best known Healing Wish Pokemon out there. Because I was looking at your team and I was like, how are you keeping things up? Because you have Leafeon with Wish, but this Leafeon does not want to come to games, honestly, because it's going to be fighting for Terra with Raging Bolt. I know it's technically a Chlorophyll user, but if you're bringing these 2 over any 2 of these, or any 3 of these, I suppose, then I feel like you're missing out some key components. I know there are matchups where Pheasantipity, Mesprit, Weavile really don't have a good time. Scizor sometimes also has matchups it doesn't want to show up to at all. But this is a Sun Core. I think it's funny. It could do something at some point. But Leafeon usually lacks the power. And if you Terra Leafeon, you can't Terra Raging Bolt, which is like a war crime. Regardless, I do think hazards are good enough on this team. You've got the double rockers in Tinglu and Mesprit, 2 Pokemon very good at setting rocks. You've got Tinglu with your spikes. It is probably going to run that more often than not, similar to Sandy Shocks. It doesn't have a whole lot it likes to run for coverage. I've run like Rest Talk in the past with dual stab. I think it can get some benefit out of things like weakness policy at times if people assume it's going to be passive. I think it's pretty decent, but its biggest problem is always getting worn down, and you having utility for it is nice. Having one of the best like toxic switch-ins on Pheasantipity is nice too, and Scizor as well. So I do like the little bit of synergy going on in there. And then Spinner Quackleval. Quackleval's coming to every game anyway, unless you're really going hard Sun. So I think, this is fine. I've run this before, and Quackleval running Spin, it doesn't mind at all. Like, even on Choice Band, Choice Scarf sets, you can fit Spin on it, and it's not bad. So I like that. Team has, U-turn in spades, so it's never really getting locked into anything. I'm not a believer in Weavile. I'll be completely honest. I think Weavile is a bit fraudulent, but I'm not a big fan of super frail, like, fast Pokemon either way. But it's just something that stands out to me as a little bit funny. But I think on this team it could do work. I just think it's one of those Pokemon that's usually way too expensive for what I like out of a Mon that does just speedy damage. Speaking of, though, this team is a bit lacking in the speed department. If we look at everything under Weavile, Ninetales is your next fastest Pokemon, is a little bit rough, especially outside of low tier. You have ways to boost in things like Aqua Step Quackleval and Chlorophyll Leafeon, I guess, so not the best boosting options. You've got decent priority, actually really good priority in Thunderclap, Bullet Punch, and Ice Shard. That priority is rarely knocking anything out from full, but it is an option. You have Choice Scarf that's really good on things like the Mesprit. So there's some decent ways to patch up that low speed, but I would like to see something either in that 115 tier or even higher, or better yet, I don't know how attached you are to some of these three pieces in the middle, but at least I think Fez fits with Tinglu well enough. I would say these two I would call replaceable if you're going to be leaning harder into Sun, and I would try to slot in something with either Photosynthesis or just another fire type that actually does damage, because Ninetales, even if you run Overheat, if you do the calcs, it's a little bit sad, honestly. So I would like to see a little more power out of these two, a little more synergy with the team as a whole. I think these two are just kind of black sheep in the family, which is fine. I think they can definitely work. They make the team less conventional and harder to check because Weavile's ice coverage is really solid, and Raging Bolt is always going to be there to check the waters. Although this team is very reliant on Raging Bolt checking the waters because water types look really good into 4 Pokemon here. So a lot of times you're going to be wanting to poison the waters, and not all waters can be poisoned. So yeah, definitely a few things standing out to me there. Other thing is Raging Bolt is your singular special attacker, pretty much. Mesprit technically is a special attacker. Ninetales, it tries its best, and in the sun, its fire type moves will do okay damage. But otherwise, like, Quacklevolt is technically stronger than Ninetales on the special side, which is pretty funny. This team needs something else in the way of special breaking power. I don't know if that's something with Weather Ball, like a Venusaur would look pretty good compared to Leafeon, or something else. That's just what I'm seeing on this team. Ninetales is just such a weird Pokemon to use, although lately I've been liking it more than Torkoal on Sun teams, because just Healing Wish. I think this is a team that can burn out fast, get hazards up early, and then just throw something in, make it deal as much damage as possible, throw the next thing in, make it deal, and then Quacklevolt eventually cleans up, Raging Bolt cleans up, you know, maybe even Leafeon, you know, one of these two. So I think this team does best with just trying to come in and punch things, and it's kind of at odds with itself with this bulky core, but it also gives you another dimension. So all that being said, I'm kind of talking myself in circles. I think the team is solid. I just think there's a bit of an identity problem where it wants to do a few different things, and nothing is like too hard to prep for on the other end, I would say. And maybe I eat my words. This team could easily go all the way, but for now, I'm going to put it at the bottom of the B tier. I think it's still, the bones are good enough. I just think there's a few more flaws in it, and that's totally okay because they could be packed with transactions, or I could just be wrong. It's a personal bias thing, and I think there's plenty of good things about this team too. All right, next up we have the Philly Shuckles, coached by Pog LBT. And this team, how did you get a Terra Hoopa Unbound this late into the game? That's kind of criminal. I know I'm seeing people say this guy's kind of a fraud these days, but with Terra, I mean, wow. And not only that, you started with a Terra Great Tusk, which turns it into probably top 5 draft Pokemon for SV, because Terra's out of its bad typing matchups. It's incredibly strong, can pretty easily win games on its own while spinning away hazards, and just the ability to switch into pretty much whatever type it wants for extra coverage, for extra damage, for anything it wants to do. It's just insane. This team is kind of the team of unconventional Pokemon, I would say. I've been thinking about conventional versus unconventional typings lately, and Inteleon is definitely not your conventional water. Mimikyu doesn't really fit any kind of anything for either of its types, and then Hoopa is also another Pokemon that doesn't really do what you'd expect. I would almost put Cloth in that category too, just because it's a regen mon. You technically do have a regen core between your Glowking and your Cloth, which is pretty funny. And then these guys, I have drafted this before, and it is so fun to just Chilly Reception, get in a Specs Curum, and start clicking Blizzard. Like, what is your opponent supposed to do? So I will say immediately, huge ups to the offensive presence of this team. It is almost like unparalleled, because Great Tusk, your removal threatens a ton. Slowking has decent enough damage on its own, but the real thing is it slow pivots alongside Corviknight into your Kyurem, into your Raikou, into Hoopa. Slow pivoting into Hoopa just sounds nasty. And then you also have these three. I think these three are kind of the flex slots, essentially, for this team. Cloth is going to come maybe once or twice if you really want rocks and don't want them on Tusk. Otherwise, these three all have their niches that they can show up, but they definitely don't have to come every game. I almost like Inteleon as your screen setter. I know you have them in spades, but Inteleon as a screen setter is really underrated. And I think it could be really solid here just to let Great Tusk, Raikou, Mimikyu, you know, any of these start going wild. Physical Kyurem with screens, with snow, like, wow. Yeah, that would be insane. So, big fan of all of that going on. I would say this team is much more solid offensively than defensively. We'll get to that in a minute. Your speed tiers are decent. I don't normally like a gap this big around the hundreds because that tends to mean that base like 110s can run like Adamant or Modest more comfortably because they know Mimikyu's not going to catch them. They also know they're not going to catch Raikou, so you're going to get hit by a little more damage from dudes in that speed tier. Otherwise, though, decent enough. You've got the Trick Room potential if you really wanted it. Otherwise, you know, a lot of these guys like running Scarf. Inteleon and Raikou particularly can definitely run Scarf some weeks. Kyurem can run Scarf, also DD. Great Tusk gets a +1 boost pretty easily. Something I would like to see with Hoopa, if I'm being completely honest with you, is Sticky Web. I think Hoopa does best when its opponents are slow, so it can actually run boosting items and not Scarf. But hey, I don't know what I would drop on this team to try to fit on a Sticky Webber, so I think it's totally reasonable not doing that. Team is a little bit light on pivoting. I guess technically you do have the chilly reception, so that's always nice. But otherwise, you're U-turning with Corvi and you're vaulting with Raikou, which means that Corvi's not going to be a body press set. Raikou's not going to be a Calm Mind set. If they are, then you're very restricted on your pivoting, which is okay because you have a regen chilly reception Slowking, so really not that necessary. Your knock users fighting for coverage sometimes. I know Hoopa spamming knock is really nice, but it's special some weeks. Mix some weeks is fine. And then Tusk is always fighting for what to put in those 4 move slots. So I do like it decently well enough. This team, the only ground switch in is Corviknight. So something like a Sandy Shocks with Earth Power plus Thunderbolt really threatens damage here. Although you do have a couple of sponges. Hoopa takes most special hits with ease. Corvi can be bulky on either side, and then Slowking very specially bulky, Great Tusk very physically bulky. So while you don't have the most stellar resistance profile, you have Pokemon that can at least take those hits, get out, heal up, do whatever they need to do. On the other side of that though, 0 ghost resist at all means a Spec Shadow Ball is really gonna hurt. Like I'm thinking of that team with Spectrier, and just it comes in, it clicks Shadow Ball, and either Mimi's Disguise gets busted, Hoopa with AV may take 2, and maybe you have to like Terra Dark or something on it. Otherwise, yeah, this is a scary matchup for against things like the Spectrier, other special ghosts that are relatively fast. So just something that stood out to me as maybe an issue in the future. Overall, though, I mean, I would not want to prep for this team because you could run things. There's so many ways you could handle options that look really good into you. Weakness Policy Mimikyu would go absolutely insane, eating a Spec Shadow Ball and then just threatening to knock out any ghost on the other side of it easily with something like a +2 Shadow Sneak, even +4 if it gets a Sword Stance up, and then things like Shadow Claw. Just kind of handle things. Things like Inteleon, if you do bring it, it has the Dark Pulse, so it does have some threatening there. I just think particularly ghosts and grounds are going to be a little annoying for this team. Overall, though, I am a big fan. This was the Shuckles. I also really like this logo. I liked a lot of the logos in here, the Ursarings as well. I would put it on even ground with these two in the B tier. I think offensively, it would be S. Like the amount of offensive pressure you give off is insane. But because of the defensive instability, I'm going to put it down in that B tier. I'm hoping it doesn't get too crowded. If the B tier gets too crowded, I'm going to end up moving some things around, moving some people up and down. But for now, that's where I would place it. I think, I'm going to place it up just a little bit. I don't know why you're not moving. Yeah, I'm going to place it at the very tippy top, B++ for now, and we'll see if it moves again later. All right, and next up we have Orcutt Ursarings, that might be a typo, Tapu Pekos. That's a hard name to say. Regardless, I'm just gonna do something a little early. I'm just gonna take this team right here, and this team, this is personal bias. This team is at least S-. This is an insane team to get. Torn T, Minshao, and Cyclozar. This is a wild regen core. Torn T and Cyclozar alone are just like unbelievably good together because they can stay healthy. They both absorb hits decently well. They both have honestly the same speed tier, which may be to somewhat of a detriment, but just the utility that these two bring is so unbelievably good. And just honestly, if you just showed me these 6 Pokemon and told me that's the team you're getting, I would be happy. This team is crazy because Pecharunt, Tinkaton, Moltres, 3 of the best known defensive backbones to teams with just an insane amount of utility on their own, and they all do unique things. Well, mostly unique in the case of Moltres, because Talonflame is kind of just it, but faster and worse. Moltres, fantastic at getting burns, pivoting, dealing surprising amounts of damage given what it is. Kind of same with Tinkaton, even though Tinkaton's offenses are not like stellar looking. Gigaton Hammer, what wants to come in on that? So incredible typing, probably best typing in the game, right beside a Pecharunt, which is just crazy value, crazy bulk, can always invest outside of defense. So it could be strong, it could be speedy, whatever you really need this thing to be. And even though it only gets about 6 moves, that's the only moves you really need. You can be a nasty plot set, you can be more utility with parting shot, foul play, recover, and then you're just obnoxious and hard to ever kill. And put this thing with reliable recovery, beside 3 regen mons, and I just don't see how this team is going down without significant flaws in like either prep or gameplay, or an opponent that just absolutely outplays you, or you get really unlucky and you like miss all your flying moves with Torn, I suppose, or you'd never get your poisons with Pecharunt. But otherwise, this team looks just absolutely incredible. Not even looking at the back half, because Iron Crown as a Terra Captain is another one of those top 5, I would say, which is just crazy that it was taken this late. I would say in a lot of leagues I've seen, Terra Iron Crown goes in the first 3 rounds. So the fact that it went under the radar for this long, I mean, I know we've seen quite a few teams with a turn 1 Terra Captain, but it's just crazy to me that it lasted this long. This thing, its base typing is totally fine. You know, it's never bad to have 2 steel types, but the fact that you have 2 steel types, but this one can Terra into whatever it wants is just crazy, because this could easily Terra Steel, Terra Psychic, deal crazy damage, Terra Water, Terra Fairy to be super bulky, get extra coverage. And the sky's the limit. This guy was made to terrasilize, and it's going to be really sad when that mechanic goes away, if it eventually does. And then even past that, Melodic, you know, very bulky on its own, very hard to break, requires a lot of grass or electric types. That is one slight weakness I will say this team is electric types are going to be your absolute bane. You don't have a ground type, which is kind of insane. I would say definitely, I'm not telling you to get rid of things, but consider moving around. Probably these 2 pieces I would say are the least impactful to the team to get a ground type on. Otherwise, you would want Terra Ground on Iron Crown realistically, because you need some way to stop electrics from running around against your team. Cyclozar can obviously absorb the hits, they resist, but it doesn't like to get it paralyzed, because then you'd have to run Shed Skin over regen. You don't want to do that, or else you're just slow. And Cyclozar, without its speed, it loses a lot of value. Other than that, you know, the fact that this team actually found room for webs alongside 2 rockers, and I think Tinkaton is one of the best, most reliable rockers in the game. You don't need much more than that. You've got Spin and Cyclozar. I don't think either of these 2 actually get defog. So I guess you have secondary Spin and more Piku, but honestly, Rapid Spin Cyclozar is all you really need. You're just gonna kind of be forced to bring it for the foreseeable future, which is never really a bad thing. Cyclozar can always do something, either utility set or actually dealing more damage than you would think with a Life Orb and things like Draco and Double Edge. It really does actually exert decent pressure if you really need it to. Team has fantastic pivoting to go alongside the Regenerator core. All 3 of the Regenerators get U-turn, so I really like that. Your team is not in any way hurting for a knockoff user, which is very funny. You've got the Encore on the Tink. Something I'm noticing now, I didn't really look at this before. Your lowest speed is 81 and your highest is 121, so anything 80 or lower, unless it's scarfed or it's creeping like bulky Melodic or bulky Pecharunt, you know, bulk on some of these middling mons, things at like base 70 are just going to be 252 HP, and that's going to be a lot harder for you to break. Fortunately, though, I think you win most battles against time, given triple regen, Pech, and Moltres, and Melodic. So maybe not the end of the world there. but I do kind of wish there was a little more to flesh out the bottom here. I don't know where that would come from. Probably the Morpeko, honestly. If there was a weak link to this team, it's Terra, Lycanroc, Midnight. This thing always so good in theory. It's like one of 3 mons that gets fully accurate physical rock moves. In practice, it rarely does what you expect it to do, and it's going to be fighting for a Terra slot with Iron Crown, which is just kind of insane, or with Levani, which realistically is only ever running like against the Sun team. It could run like an offensive type, otherwise it's running Ghost, so it doesn't get spun on. But you already have one of the best spin blockers in the game in Petrarun. Petrarun a little threatened by the ground types, but that's what Balloon's for, that's what Shuckleberry's for. And you only have to stop them from spinning as long as they're around. So if you KO them with some of this crazy amount of offense here, then you're in good shape. Overall, fantastic. I think just this team needs a ground top. It needs something a little slower, maybe secondary removal. If you had something like a Gligar over this Morpeko or any kind of ground, really, I think this team would just be amazing. And I already ranked it S. I'm regretting that a little bit. Maybe it's A++, but I'm kind of getting annoyed at myself for how much I've stuffed all the tiers into 2. But no ground type is kind of a deal breaker because the electric types are just going to be so annoying. Things like a Sandy Shocks or a Raging Bolt is just going to love this team, even though you do have a lot of ways around it. Cyclozar kind of helps with Raging Bolt. It at least threatens to revenge it. Otherwise, though, I do think this team is fantastic. Just a ground is over Morpeko and Lycanroc, you're off to the races. Okay, we're going to take a quick break from going through all the teams, and I'm going to analyze some of the things that were left on the board, maybe help motivate some teams that might be wanting to make some moves. Potentially grab something here. I see Deoxys Speed is the only like super high tier that wasn't taken. I think that's totally fair. We've been seeing Deoxys Speed get left behind a lot lately. It does offer really nice utility. It's got the hazards. It's a psychic type with all the normal psychic utility. But its moveset is kind of stuck in past gens. It doesn't get a single fairy move. Its fighting coverage is pretty much relegated to Focus Blast and Superpower, which isn't, optimal. But the thing is, it's just so ridiculously fast. It's a Prankster Mon without Prankster. So I think it could go really well on a team. I think we've seen a couple of teams now that don't have a Psychic. So I think that's definitely a decent option there. Looking here, things here that weren't taken make sense. Seeing no Annihilate go is a little sad because Annihilate just fits so well on a lot of archetypes of teams, and if nothing else, it can be a Scarf Final Gambit bot. So a little sad to see that still around. I see that 2 of the Ogrepons didn't get taken. I feel like Ogrepon Cornerstone, more expensive than Hearthflame, is kind of insane. But Hearthflame has been doing like not quite as well as it had in the past lately, and I see that their Terra tax here, I guess, kind of makes sense. Versus definitely don't want that to Terra. And I know that Wellspring went, so that does make some sense. Thundy T, if anybody's struggling with their Terra Captains, Thundy T might be top 3 high tier, like Terra Tax, Terra Captains, just because it's ridiculously strong and bulky enough to take most hits, at least one. Then we get a little lower. Most of these make sense. I can't remember which team it was, but the team without an Unburdenmon. There's an Unburdenmon right here, probably one of the best to ever do it. Let me see, what else do we have? Gardevoir not being taken is interesting. It gives a lot of utility to a lot of teams. Good Weber and Araquanid if anybody wants that. If people wanted to fill out their middling speed tiers, there's things like Hoopa. I saw Palmont actually got dropped. That's a Revival Blessing Mon. That would have been cool to see, but I understand, if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. Dudunsparce coming up. I know there's a very special type of team near and dear to my heart. Dudunsparce fits great on teams like that, which we'll get to. A little bit of propping that up, a little bit of foreshadowing. Cineroar not going is interesting because it's really hard to slot in a bulky fire and or a bulky dark. So the fact that it didn't go means that most teams must not have seen the value in it. But it is pretty decent in singles still. And yeah, that's about where we're at. Oh, I see. Oh, actually, there's some value in the low tiers. Look at this. 6-point Hisuian Coolfish. This thing offers so much for the price. And same with Miss Magius. These 2 are 2 of my favorite low tiers to pick up, and the fact that neither of them are gone. We got Hariyama. I know I've seen quite a few teams with solid fighting types, but 6-point Hariyama, I mean, come on. If you need that extra fighting, like physical threat, it's great. And Espeon the exact same with special threatening. So some of these teams that lack breakers on one side or the other, definitely consider one of those two. Balm of Snow kind of working both sides of the fence there, being offensive either way. Yeah. And I think that's about it. There's some more power down here. If someone really needs secondary removal, I like Girder as secondary removal. I know it's not like standard or anything, but it's kind of funny. Some good special attackers that aren't too expensive as Terracaps that could definitely help out. Oh, and another fantastic Unburdenmon in the Driftblim. So definitely a few of the pieces that stand out to me here. Definitely some power in these low tiers that I think might offer some teams more than what they're currently getting out of their last few points. So something worth considering. All right, next up, to get back on the teams, we have the Big LeMeowstic, coached by Khan. And it's interesting because this is the second Sun team we're seeing, and this is the second Sun team that I've went over that definitely has some anti-synergy going on. So that's really interesting to see, because Golden Go and Samurott definitely not fans of Sun being up. Neither is Amoonguss, if we're being honest. But the rest of these guys love it. Well, maybe not Scyther, but Scyther can Terra. So it's interesting because this, I'll say these three and Walking Wake, this is the core of a fantastic Sun team. You don't really need more Sun than this. But the problem is when you're actively hurting your other Pokemon with your Sun, it makes me a little nervous. But also, I suppose it does give things. I think Amoonguss gets Weather Ball, if I'm not mistaken, so it gives it a little bit of extra coverage there. So that's not horrible. And of course, you can play around your own Sun. You don't have to run Heat Rock, so you can limit the own turn. The turn Sun is up, so you can only have these Pokemon in. And then when Sun's ending, these guys, you know, very good Pokemon in their own right. Golden Go, best removal denial in the game, right beside a Hisuian and Samurott, who sets spikes more freely than most other people 90% of the time. Otherwise, feels bad to miss those ceaseless edges. Amoonguss, regen is a recurring theme. I think maybe every region Mon went looking at it at this point, which is kind of funny. But Amoonguss, I would say it's nice to have the bulky grass, but I mean, if you're committing to the Sun, then the Brubano is right there. But I guess, you know, Triple Dark, maybe not the way to go. So maybe this was better. Screamtail, honestly, one of my favorite Pokemon. I don't know that it needed to be a Terra Captain, but maybe it didn't cost very much more, but its base typing is honestly pretty well fine. So more often than not, I do expect Walking Wake to be the captain of choice on this team. But Screamtail, being super annoyingly bulky and having the ability to flex into any type, honestly could do it wonders against certain teams if you really needed that bulky answer. And normally you don't see a whole lot of bulk as the Terra Captain, so I think that's pretty cool as well. And I think maybe it was a budget thing because Wake was like 20, Screamtail barely made it under the 15 mark. It had to be below 15 base to make it, and then Scyther just filled in nicely because Scyther loves to get out of its base typing. So I do like what you've got going on here with the Terra trio. Roaring Moon is Pokemon I've used. A lot of people like to call it Roaring Mid. I think they're wrong. I think Roaring Moon is fantastic. You throw it in Sun and suddenly it gets Booster and the item of its choice, which just, it makes it unbelievable. And then you filled out your team pretty nicely. You've got Gligar to help with the hazard support. Besides Samurott, you've got 4 total Rockers, which is pretty good. I found myself almost never running Rocks on Screamtail, but I mean, this team definitely could have room for it, but it could also fit elsewhere as well. Spin on Torkoal, and I believe Scyther still gets Defog, because Scizor does. So I want to say Scyther does too. I don't think Gligar gets it in this gen, but that's a decent enough hazard removal pair, I would say. Pivoting, okay. You've got good enough flip turn, U-turn, and then it's just things like Torkoal can be a bit of a momentum sink, but then you've got things like Baton Pass. So yeah, it's not the end of the world. I like that well enough. All of your utility is kind of forced into Screamtail, outside of like Spore to sleep things, because you've got your Encore here, you've got your potential screens here, your Wish passing, all of that kind of sitting on Screamtail's shoulders. So once again, it is going to be your primary backbone. But with this team, I actually don't hate that, because you have such a solid defensive core in these 3 Pokemon that Screamtail's just there to help fill in the gaps if you don't want to bring any of these, or if there's a specific problem Pokemon on the other team, you can bring it, threaten to Terra it, when in reality, you just want to Terra Water Walking Wake and click Hydro Steam in the Sun and watch things go away. Because unless they're a water immune, they're not going to appreciate that. And, you know, Dragon types obviously aren't going to appreciate a Draco either. So I'm a big fan of that. I think Walking Wake Roaring Moon, Sun. Like, this is already a great team. And then you've got this archetype, which is fantastic. So Golem, I think he's just hanging out here. I mean, he technically traps steel types, but you know, it's a Golem. So I think he's funny. He could be, actually, wait, there's a thing with my group that if when in doubt with your bottom points, just get a sturdy rock setter, and then you can, it's really easy to get the rest of the team going, and you don't have to worry about rocks on a better Pokemon. So actually, big fan of that now that I'm looking at it. So yeah, I think team pretty solid overall. You're pretty reliant on these two to switch in on Earthquakes, and I don't think either of these are really coming to every game. Like, ideally, you're bringing Wake and some combination of these 6, probably leaving a Moongus at home some games, Screamtail at home every once in a while, maybe Torkoal if you don't want Sun. Otherwise, though, it's going to be hard to fit either of those, and very hard to fit both, so you might find yourself running anti-ground move Terra on Screamtail more often than you like. Rock's weak is it's there, but you've got Spin. You're gonna run Boots on Torkoal probably more often than not, unless you're running Heat Rock, so not horrible. Otherwise, resistances look pretty decent. Like, I thought I would have more negative to say. I guess you've got the same speed problem I've called out. Apparently, I think this league is just allergic to anything between like 80 and 40 speed from what I can tell. But hey, that's fine. If nobody's doing it, then everybody's got the same problem, right? And it's not so bad. But I would say A70 speed Pokemon is not a bad thing to have. You've got good anti-Trick Room here, though. Between Amoonguss and Torkoal, no one's going to want to bring Trick Room against you. So I do like that. I think plenty of breaking power on both sides. Yeah, no real complaints. Good setup. You know, I'm a fan. I think this team... Oh, and I did flex out the tiers a little bit better. Luckily, ignore the ad in the corner. I don't know why it's a Pepto ad. But I added an S- A+ tier and an A- B+ tier just because I thought those made a little more sense. These two teams fit solidly onto B. These teams are the ones that I was having trouble deciding on. And then this team, although it does have a couple flaws, namely ground type, that I do think it still belongs in its own tier up here, but not quite an S tier. And we were looking at the Big LeMeowstic. Let me take one more glance at the team. Yeah, this team, very good. I would put it honestly at the top of A, I feel. May move around a little bit because I need to remind myself. It's been a second since I was recording the first half. I took a little break, so I need to revisit these. But right now, I think this Sun team is going to be really hard to deal with, especially with how you coaches actually brought any kind of anti-weather. I don't know that I've seen hardly any Prankster yet, so that's going to make Sun more oppressive than it normally is. And one last thing I would add, Amoonguss is also an odd pick here just because normally I think you'd expect a Venusaur or even a Victory Bell if you didn't have the points to help get an actual speed boost from the Sun because Chlorophyll just goes so well with it. So I guess if you ever wanted to make transactions, I haven't looked too well at the rest of the teams, but a Venusaur would fit in perfectly where this Amoonguss is now and get a lot of value out of the Sun. All right, next up we have the Toronto Iron Leaves, coached by the Crew, and honestly, a very powerful and very bulky looking team. I'm trying to kind of make sense of it. This one has a lot of pieces. I'm trying to fit them together in my head. So what I'm seeing at first, crazy offensive duo between the Rapid Strike Urshifu with Terra. Most of the time probably going to be wanting the Terra Water, but Terra Grass is also an option. Terra Ice is decent to hit those grass types. I like it pretty well. And then a Darkrai, it's a weird one this generation because of course it wasn't allowed at the beginning very much, and then people were like, maybe this thing's not so bad. And what I'm seeing a lot out of it is people either run something like Specs or Scarf. You've got your sub attackers, but then you've also got things like Hypnosis, Blunder Policy. So this thing has a lot of flexibility and can definitely just clear teams on its own. It's kind of like some of the other Pokemon we've talked about where it's a little stuck in the past as far as his moveset goes, but definitely not bad. And then there's just a crazy amount of bulk in the middle here. I'm going to ignore a couple, but these 5 are just incredibly difficult to break. You've got good healing in 3 of them. One of them probably one of the best Wish Passers in the game. Not that Wish Pass is used incredibly often, but when you can keep your other Pokemon up, Florges is one of the best to do it. And none of these are slackers offensively either. Braviary, really strong, really good hazard removal deterrent in the Braviary, so I like that. Dragalge, Florges, Metagross, and Gastrodon are all just so annoying to try to break down because you want grass for this, the other three don't care. You want fire or fighting or ghost for this, the other three don't really care. So yeah, I really like the flexibility of the bulk on this team. You've got your hazards pretty much relegated to these two because you're not really, you can run Stealth Rock on Metagross, you can run Spikes on Ogre, but I think these two most of the time are going to be where you find your hazards. You got the Regieleki, which super unique Pokemon. Really appreciate support for things that can hit ground types, and you definitely did that between the Urshifu, Gastrodon to an extent, and Ogerpon. Although Ogerpon's a little awkward, it can't really come in on ground types too comfortably, but it does have things like Horn Leech to keep itself alive, can be annoying with Subseed, so not the worst. And you want things that can also take advantage of screens, because that's one of Regieleki's best tools it brings. It brings spin and it brings screens. So looking at this team, Nasty Plot Darkrai adores having screens set up. Metagross with agility can run weakness policy, is kind of a bread and butter. Urshifu can Swords Dance, Florges Calm Mind, so I like what's going on here. Things like Dragalge can be offensive, it can also run a more flex slot, it can flip turn around. And then somehow you almost wait until your very last pick to pick up Ogerpon Hearthflame, which is kind of crazy to me because it was pretty cheap on this board. It was the same price as normal Ogerpon, and this thing is very powerful. Its main weakness is that it is weak to rocks, and your removal Regieleki, I can't remember for the life of me if Braviary and Florges still get defogged or not. I'm almost sure Florges does not get defogged this gen, so it would be just these two, and that's kind of hard. If you want to bring like all of these -1 plus Ogerpon, then you're gonna have to drop one of them for removal, and Bayonet's just hanging out, honestly. I don't think this would ever show up. It is technically a ghost, so if you wanted a hazard stack, you do have a spin blocker, but it's poor thing's just been left behind without its mega, especially. So looking over your different pieces here, I like the team, but I'm feeling a lack of something. I'm trying to place it because your speed I actually really like. I really like, you know, nothing's catching Regieleki really unless they're scarfed and expecting it to run like Modest. You've got good like tiering of your speeds, so Darkrai to Ogerpon to Urshifu to Braviary I think is pretty solid. One more in here wouldn't be horrible, but I think that's definitely very good. You actually have things chilling in the 60s and 70s, which is more than a lot of these teams have, which is pretty funny. And these guys might get to take advantage of that because they may be able to run way more bulk and not really have to worry about any kind of speed. And then yeah, Gastrodon is just kind of an all-in-one sponge to help take up hits, be a good water immune for your team, even though your team really doesn't mind water hits that much. The problem with Ogerpon is it kind of fights itself with its resistances. Like, it's not resistant to ground, it's weak to rock, it's not resistant to water, so it doesn't really do the things you want a grass type to do. But with this team, if you want to just go, you know, crazy full offense, you just run Ogre, these two, probably screen Zelecki, and then fill in with your choice of whatever else you want in the back. I'm just failing to see, because like I think these three are top tier, or at least mid top tier, and these guys are all what I would consider lower tier in this type of league. So I'm wondering where the mid tier stuff is. Like, I didn't look at the prices too well, but I feel like there's room to upgrade something in here for another like decent threat that's going to force a lot more prep, because a lot of these things can kind of be handled with one Pokemon. So Gastro, you just need like, I know it can run Toxic, but like a bulky water, or like, you know, certain Pokemon can just completely brick wall Gastro, grass types especially. You got Regieleki, ground types, grass types both give it a hard time. Dragalge can't touch steels, it can flip turn on them, but it can't really do any damage. Yeah, so team actually very reliant on these two to actually break down steel types outside of non-stab coverage. But at the end of the day, it's not horrible. I like the bulk, I like the offense. It's just I feel like there's something missing, and I'm sorry, I can't put my finger on it because you've got your types all figured out. That's all good. I would say another thing, other teams I've talked about, X Pokemon wants to Tera 9 times out of 10. I think on this team particularly, Urshifu wants to Tera 10 times out of 10. I don't think there is going to be very rarely a time when either Florges or Braviary Terras, because both of these actually on this team really enjoy their base typing, because Braviary is your only natural ground resistance or immunity at all. Everything else takes at least neutral from an earthquake, which is a bit stressful to me. because Braviary is definitely not an every game kind of Pokemon. So that would stress me out a little bit. And then Florges, you know, base fairy typing is very good. You're solid against both poison and steel types. You actually only have one. Your ogre's weak to poison, but other than that, Florges is the only thing weak to either type. So rarely does this thing ever want to leave its base typing. I guess if you wanted to run more offensive flex sets, then it doesn't mind having the extra coverage. But at the end of the day, I think that Terra would go much better on something else here. I think Ogre's Terra banned, but something like Metagross would really love to have that over Florges. Otherwise, so it's definitely not bad. There's definitely breaking potential in these bulky mons. All of them have solid offenses. I just worry that, I don't know, there's just, I feel like there's something missing, but I can't place it. So I can't really knock this team, because I think a team like this, I've seen teams like this in playoffs so many times because they're so good at what they do. Screens, bulk, damage. So with that, I will be placing this team in the A-B+ tier. I think maybe here-ish. Struggling. If I end up figuring out what I can't put my finger on right now about what is off about this team, then I'll make an append at the end of this section. But otherwise, I mean, I hope this team does good things, but I definitely could see room for transactions somewhere in the future if it does struggle. Well, I guess, okay, I thought about it a little bit, so I am appending something. I guess the thing with this team that I'm looking at is there's not a lot of flexibility. I think that's what I was trying to get at. Darkrai is always going to be special, either setup or breaker. Urshifu, physical, setup or breaker. Metagross is either going to be rocks or it's going to be physical. Most of the time, I like special Metagross, but it's going to be like... This team is relatively predictable, is what I would say. Florges is always going to be bulky, maybe Wish Pass, Moonblast. Gastrodon, bulky, Dragouge. You know, all of these Pokemon have very defined roles. There's not a whole lot of versatility between this entire squad. So maybe that's what's standing out to me. But maybe that's what this team needs. A little more of that X factor. Maybe a different Terra Captain. Drop something. Doesn't have to be Florges. But just have a little more of something unpredictable in here. And I think this team would do great. All right, next up we have the Hondew Honchkrows, coached by Dresho. And I'm having nightmares already because I just recently got absolutely demolished by a Terra Zarude. So I would say in terms of the current Scarlet Violet Terra Tax meta, I would be bold enough to say Zarude is the #1 Terra Tax Pokemon in the game. This thing is unbelievable as soon as it gets out of its base typing. It has everything it needs to be a fantastic Scarf, Band user, Bulk Up user, it gets Trailblaze, it gets Encore. This Pokemon single-handedly wins games. The rest of your team matters less because of how good Zarude is, but the rest of the team also does help Zarude function. And I think this team has some tools to help Zarude really be at its best, because you've got the Palafin to offer a lot of extra physical pressure, help really break things down. You have grass types that really don't mind switching on either of these, at least pre-Terra Zarude. So I think Zapdos is nice to have to help scare those, and I guess in a way Frostmoth can also do that. But also grass types seem very solid into this team because it resists Greninja's Stab, it resists Urshifu's Earthquake as well as Dugtrios. Something I think the point I'm trying to make with this team is it lacks type diversity in a bit. So I think the bones of this team are kind of crazy, because you've got triple water with rain. So you've got the rain Pelipper. So here we see our first non-sun team. So you instantly advantage over those, at least with the base weather. But you also have a boosted Greninja who's going to be doing insane damage in the rain, as well as a boosted Palafin. So you can't even have like a dedicated physical or special sponge for the two. You're going to have to find a way to split those defenses. And most things aren't going to want to take a Specs Dark Pulse or a banded, you know, whatever this wants to hit, close combat, ice punch, whatever. So I think in that sense, you're attacking your opponents where they can't defend. You also have things like Hurricane Thunder, Zapdos that can do really big work. I think it also gets Weather Ball, so really good there. So in its own, this rain team plus Zarude looks crazy. The rest of the team is where I'm losing a little bit of what the game plan was here, because I'm looking at Uxie. Uxie is probably one of the best support Pokemon in the game. It is the psychic type of psychic types. It gets that extra ground immunity. It gets a ton of support. This is your rocker. I'd say 9 times out of 10. You get screens if you need them, U-turn if you need it. Otherwise, just really handy options. Can be a Calm Mind setup sweeper if your opponent doesn't expect it. And you don't have a whole lot of other stuff here in the way of special setup. I would say Frostmoth is your only other piece. So you could really catch opponents off guard with that. So I do like that quite a bit. Ursaluna, you know, no switch ins on this once Flame Orb is up. You can run Assault Vest Bulletproof as well to really sponge some hits and still deal reasonable damage. Dual Stab is fine. Trailblaze and Ice Punch are great. Doesn't really mesh well with the Rain. I would say neither does Dugtrio. So these two are really at odds with the Rain mode entirely. And if you're bringing either of them, you probably don't want Pelipper, which means you're going to be forced to make some weird decisions on the team building. Frostmoth without Terra is not very good in my opinion. It's that base typing is one of the worst possible, and it's just so weak to so many things. And even at +1, it's struggling to outspeed things with that base 65, and it can OHKO things. But Ice Beam, Bug Buzz, you know, there are switch-ins to that. I think water types and bulky waters are going to be another headache for this team, because the only things really dealing damage to bulky waters is Zarude and Zapdos. So once again, you're relying a ton on Zapdos to do most of the damage for this team. And then Dugtrio, you know, not bad to fill that speed slot, but I think people are already prepping for Ursaluna to be clicking Earthquake against them, or Ground Move. So Dugtrio's never going to, you know, hold a candle to the amount of damage Ursaluna can do. The only thing Dugtrio has on Ursaluna is its speed and the fact that it slows something down once while dying, thanks to Tangling Hair, usually. So I think definitely a couple pieces down here could be moved around, kind of optimized a little more. If I had to give some kind of recommendation, I would say you'd need to fill out a couple more types. Your team currently has no Fairy. You have 1 Dragon Resist, in the Dugtrio, which is not really what I would consider a true resist. And other than that, something clicks a Banded Outrage into your team, and unless you're Zarude's Terra Fairy or Terra Steel, you're not going to have very much fun with Banded Outrage. Obviously, you Revenge with things like the Greninja with Ice Beam, Palafin Ice Punch, but still, you're not going to appreciate that. Other things, you have 1 Fairy switch in, also the Dugtrio. I got to tell you, Dugtrio Alola does not fit the mold for a steel type. It's not going to be taking very many hits. So the fact that it kind of offers most of the core defenses for this team is a little bit concerning, in my opinion. And then just in general, you're missing a few types on your own. I think Poison is one of the most important types to have on a draft, because otherwise you're going to get T-Spike set up against you. With your specific team, I think you actually don't mind T-Spikes the most. Zarude can jungle healing, Zapdos doesn't care, Uxie doesn't care, Ursaluna appreciates T-Spikes, it actually likes getting the poison without having to waste an item slot, and Pelipper doesn't care, and then Frostmoth probably running Boots. So at the end of the day, the only Pokemon that are really caring about something like T-Spikes is Palafin, Greninja. That's it, actually. So I would say maybe your team is not the poster child of a team that needs a poison type, but the resistance profile of a poison is also really nice to have. Team also lacking a ghost, so if you wanted to get up hazards, you have no way to spin block unless Zarude runs Terra Ghost. So if you decided to spike stack with Greninja, your opponent's just going to spin on you, and I guess you can punish it with static Zapdos, but otherwise it's kind of gets that for free. No dragon is what it is. No fairy is a little tough. Like we mentioned, the dragon spam is going to be tough, but Zarude does like Terra Fairy, but it does not function as a fairy. It does not offer like the Moonblast. It doesn't offer anything like that. So I would say in general, this Rain core, super cool. I would say these 4 specifically. Greninja, if you want to leave it on there, pretty good. But otherwise, I think something needs to be flexed out. Something needs to be changed about this to get something else in here. A fairy resist, a fighting resist, because your team is Zarude can Terra, and Zapdos and Uxie are good. Actually, never mind. This is a little off because it's taking into account Zarude is a fighting weak, and it's always going to Terra. But just something to fill out the resist profile a little better than Dugtrio can do, and something to go along with this Rain while also giving you a little bit more flexibility in terms of types. Only other thing I really noticed, no Rapid Spinner on the team means you cannot hazard stack your opponent and let them hazard stack you back without you getting rid of both sides hazards, which is not good. If I'm not mistaken, at least 2 of these 3 don't get defog anymore. I can't remember if Pelipper does, but if it doesn't, you have no removal, which is very bad. Definitely, if that's true, you need to swap out Frostmoth or Dugtrio or something for removal. Maybe Pelipper does still get defog. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure Frostmoth. At least Zapdos doesn't get defog anymore. That one's I would have to look up. But yeah, I would say team is very solid. Zarude is the strongest Terra Captain possible. These are great pieces. The rest of it needs some help, I would say. It could still do good things. I'm just a little nervous. I'm going to put it in C for now, with the prospect of 2 transactions could turn this team from a C tier team into an A tier team. Okay, quick correction. I did look up the defoggers, and this team's current only removal is Frostmoth, which is very scary. So I would definitely highly recommend getting a different hazard removal in here ASAP. All right, next up we have the drugged up Drampas, coached by Pachio. And I'm having so much trouble analyzing this one. This one is crazy min-maxed because Ogerpon Wellspring, probably the second best Terra Tax Pokemon in the game behind Zarude. It right up there with like Iron Crown. But just the Spadef, getting the Spadef boost, being able to set up, it's insane. That boosted Ivy Cudgels make this such a ridiculous threat. And then Terra Cresselia could be a solid like utility mon, but also it could just set up and win games on its own. All it needs is that change typing. It's already off the ground and levitate, so it has great synergy with Terra Poison, Terra Steel to stop it from getting toxic. So Terra Captain's S+ on this team. Some of the pieces are crazy. So you have things like Landorus, Iron Boulder, and Hydreigon all can set up. Iron Boulder can boost its speed, and all of them become instant win conditions for a team. Supported by the best hazard setter in the game, or one of the best hazard setters in Glimmora, alongside one of the best screen setters in the game in Grimmsnarl. So these two, usually full support, can both run offense in their own right. You could see Meteor Beam, Power Herb, you could see Banded, Grimmsnarl. But most of the time, they're going to be running support to help the rest of this team out. And these top four really appreciate the screens and hazards to just run away with games, honestly. Where I'm getting lost, these last two, Bronzong, all other than rocks, is entirely redundant with Terra Cresselia, and honestly worse in most ways. It doesn't get as much. It can technically be physical, but I think Bronzong is to fill when your team has a lot of issues with things like ground types. Your team is solid against ground types. You've got 3 Pokemon off the ground already. I don't think Bronzong was really called for, and also it's making your team like show off its glaring weakness to ghost and dark type moves like even more. Now I know you have ways to punish knockoff, because knockoff, 4 times resisted by Grimmsnarl and gets up T spikes, but Shadow Ball outside of Hydreigon and I suppose Grimmsnarl is incredibly free into this team, or Poltergeist even is just doing crazy amounts of damage into this team. So ghost types are going to be a big issue, especially if they're faster than Typhlosion, because if they're Scarf, then they outrun that too. So I worry a little bit about that. And no normal type is, no immunity. You got the resist, but you're never going to run Terra Normal Cresselia, I don't think. I guess you could, but it'd be a little weird. Similar to the last team we talked about, no Rapid Spin on this team, although you do have Mortal Spin Glimmora as your removal. That means you can technically be spin blocked by Steel types, which is kind of funny. I don't know if teams will pick up on that, but that is something they can do to stop you from getting rid of hazards on your own side, because once again, I'm a little rusty on my defog users, but I know at least Landorus doesn't get it this gen, and I'm not positive Hydreigon does. So being fully reliant on Glimmora to remove hazards when on a team like this, I would say it's a Pokemon that doesn't come every time, is a little bit rough. Although, all this being said, this team could very easily win by just setting up hazards, setting up screens, and then pick your poison of these 4 or Cresselia, and you just win the game. Like, your opponent just can't do anything about all the hazards and the screens being set up against them. So, that in itself, your team is flush with win cons. I just worry that if you don't get set up first, your opponents are going to set up on you, because things like this water weakness that you've really kind of compounded, like Cresselia doesn't really care, but having Hydreigon and Ogerpon as your switch-ins when they're really primary win cons is a little bit difficult. And we've already talked about the ghost and dark issue. So I would say my first suggestion for this team, drop this Bronzong like it's hot. Like, you have all you would ever want a Bronzong to do within honestly, within Cresselia, Boulder, Grimmsnarl are the 3 roles that I would say Bronzong would take. So you don't need it, and it'll make your defensive like profile look a lot better. Okay, I lied a little bit, but if you get something, I don't know. There's ways to patch the typing holes. I don't know that Bronzong is it. Typhlosion also looks decent, honestly, against these Sun teams. I think Typhlosion actually gains some value because it can take advantage of the opponent's Sun to really do some big damage. So I do like it there. Team is a little light on pivoting, but it has enough U-turn around to be pretty good. The one Encore to help Ogerpon set itself up is really nice. I just think if there just needs to be a couple pieces move here, and this team's not going to lose a game. Because Terra Cresselia, disgusting. Terra Ogerpon, disgusting. Landorus can run either side setup. It can run Band, Scarf, you know, whatever you want it to do. And then Iron Boulder, I'm not fully convinced without Terra is that an actual threat, but you know, anything with a 100 accurate rock type move is a threat in my book, at least a little bit. And then Hydreigon, of course, fell a little bit out of its prime, but still really solid. So that would be my main suggestion. I really like, honestly, all of this. Maybe drop Boulder. I don't know. I think this might be a team you play around with for the first few weeks, honestly. See what works, what doesn't, and then make some transactions. I think this team does need some kind of move. I think it's just Bronzong, honestly. But with one other thing here that isn't as easily handled by things that are already checking Cresselia, Grimmsnarl, and or Iron Boulder, I think this team has so many ways to win. It's kind of crazy. So with that, I would take this team and I would put it solidly in the B tier. I'm losing track of who is on what team. Ignore the lady in the corner. But I will put it in the middle of B tier for now. Maybe do some adjusting later, but I do think that's a good spot for it. All right, next up we have the Moonlit Umbreons, coached by Habane himself, the person who invited me to do these analyses. And honestly, I've been looking at this team for a minute. And I want weather on this team, and I think I see the weather. I see what you're doing here, because this may be one of the first prankster Pokemon we've covered, but I see the Sableye, and I see a few Pokemon that really enjoy rain, and a few Pokemon that really enjoy sun. Overall, I think it's a super interesting team. I've seen split weather teams before, and I've rarely seen them do well. So I hope this one can break the mold there. We have all of our offense front loaded on this team realistically. We have a couple of offensive threats in the back as well, but I would say most of the time your KOs are going to be from these 3 Pokemon or Rotom getting something like picked off with a Volt Switch, something like that. And then you've got your solid defensive core here. So this team feels, I don't want to say standard, but I want to say this team checks boxes really well, I would say. Garchomp, probably one of the best and one of the most classic round 1 picks. Lately been relegated to round 2 a little more often than not. I'm a little surprised you got Bundle on the way back instead of flipping these 2, but hey, it works. And Terra Iron Moth round 3 is kind of insane. I will warn you, I've used Terra Iron Moth in the past. If you don't Terra into like grass or bug, you are still going to get one shot by some like stab earthquakes because this thing's physical defense is just atrocious. But that doesn't, you know, limit the fact that this is a fantastic special attacker, sweeper, loves the ability to Terra. Similar to the other teams that only have 1 Terra Captain, I will warn that that does mean it probably is coming every single week. Your opponent's going to prep a little harder for it because they don't have to worry about a Terra lower down on the list. But I think that's okay. Bundle, obviously one of the best Pokemon to ever do it 80% of the time. The other 20%, it can't land a water move. But fast freeze dry, really good special attack, surprisingly decent physical bulk, which I think a lot of people forget about, and at just a blisteringly fast speed tier. Really fits well on this team. I love the way these speed tiers look, going all the way to 136, hitting every major point, stopping anything from ever wanting to run Adamant or Modest. Everything's going to want to flex that plus speed nature, so really big fan of that. The bulk is super annoying to break. I would say these 2 alone, being able to Volt Switch into each other, is really obnoxious. But not only that, Fortress is one of the best hazard stackers if you don't want to fit hazards on Garchomp. You've got your spinner here, which is nice. It's your only spinner, so you're forced to bring Fortress, so you won't have removal, which is a little rough because Fortress definitely is going to have not a fun time into those Sun teams we looked at earlier. But I guess you have anti-Sun, and you have things that enjoy being in the Sun, so it's not the end of the world. But still, I think Fortress is got to do quite a bit of heavy lifting. Kind of, we've looked at teams in the past here. It is responsible for both setting and removing hazards, so that can be a lot of weight on the shoulders of a Pokemon that doesn't have removal, but you have a Wish Passer. So a lot of the things, a lot of my critiques are actually being answered by these Pokemon. I would say you have a fantastic amount of pivoting outside of Garchomp and Sableye. Sableye might get Baton Pass, and then we'll get to Tauros. Everything here has some way to pivot, if I'm not mistaken, between flip turn, U-turn, U-turn, volt switch, baton pass, volt switch, U-turn. Yeah, wow. Okay, that's pretty incredible, the amount of pivoting you could do in a given game. Now, whether or not that pivoting forces progress is another thing, because I think Kilowattrel, Slitherwing both have Pokemon that hard resist their attacks sometimes, and so it can be a little difficult for them to actually make meaningful difference to battle, especially in a certain Pokemon with reliable recovery. I think you're asking a lot of Sableye if it's going to be your main weather setter, because then it's wanting to run a Weather Rock, which means it's not running a sash or a helmet or, you know, a button that helps. And, you know, once your opponent figures out this thing's setting weather, they're going to bring something in to heal on it or take advantage of it being, you know, kind of limited in what it can do. Obviously, Encore is a really nice move to have. Taunt is a really nice move. But then dark types really start taking advantage. So just something to be cautious of with the Sableye. Paldean Tauros, I would say this pick is entirely redundant with Slitherwing. I would say Slitherwing does everything Tauros wants to do, but better. The only thing Tauros has is its abilities. Intimidate, Anger Point, maybe a little bit of coverage and a little bit of speed on the Slitherwing. But otherwise, there's no reason for this to ever come over Slitherwing, in my opinion. So I don't know that I would keep this here. I was looking at it. So in picking types, I think one of the best, or two of the best types you can get at a budget are grass and psychic types. If we look down here, oh, look at that. No grass type, no psychic type. So I think if you chose to make any replacement swaps on this team, a decent place to start would be this Tauros, finding a grass or psychic to fill the same roles. I know Sableye kind of performs the traditional roles of a psychic type, but having one of those to help your psychic resistance, or having some kind of grass here just to be annoying and bulky and make your team think twice about running a bunch of grass coverage, which you cover for decently well between Moth, Fortress, Kilowattrel, and Slitherwing. I still think having a grass is always nice, just to have that extra amount of utility that only grass usually provides to a team. I mean, you've got solid screens, you've got solid utility. I think you're a little bit reliant on Sableye to do things to disrupt outside of bundle, and yeah, that's about it as far as your disruption goes. So really, you're getting hazards up early, you're hoping to do some chip damage with all of the pivoting, and then when your opponent's nice and weak, something like a Scale Shot Garchomp, a Specs Bundle, a Boost Your Energy Moth comes in and starts wreaking havoc, and hopefully wins the game. And honestly, with Moth, I would say it's going to win a lot of games just getting in, boost your energy, Fiery Dance gives it a boost on a KO, and then you're off to the races. So overall, I would say the double weather is throwing me a little bit, but I do like the team as a whole. I would say just turn Tauros into something else, and I'm feeling a lot better about it. But I do like this team a lot. I would put it on the same level as the Philly Shuckles. I'm not sure if I would put it above or below. I'm trying to remember the Philly Shuckles team. I'll put it below for now. I do like it a lot. I do think it has as much a chance as anybody else to make a playoff slot, make a run all the way up to the top. I just think turn Tauros into something else. And then I think there's another team that could be flexible. If you find that you like one weather mode more than the other, like if you really do prefer the rain, then, you know, you could always swap Sableye out for a Politoed. I think both Sunsetters are gone at this point, both traditional Sunsetters, so that would be a little more difficult to slot on a team. But you also have two Ironmons, so something that could set up electric terrain for you is also not horrible. This Kilowattrel, hang on, I'm doing a little bit of live editing here. Electric terrain, you have 4 electric terrain setters. Okay, so even though these two don't directly benefit from it because your 2 electrics are off the ground, setting that terrain for these two to get their booster without a boost is not a bad thing. And honestly, Electric Seed on something like a Calm Mind Sylveon could be a pretty nasty set to bring 1 week. So I do like the team. There's a lot of like flexibility, versatility you could have here, but also all these guys fill their roles so well that your opponent's going to be forced to prep for the standard, and that's where you can really take advantage. Next up, we have the Washington Woopers by Orange. And let's just appreciate the beauty of this team a minute. I'm gonna pause before I go into this. Also, we're gonna go into this tier list. I'm gonna take the Washington Woopers and put them where they belong. At very top of S. You can't even see it. I'm cutting off S tier because I added more tiers. Oops. We're gonna fix that live. I hope that worked. So yes, Mono Normal is my favorite meme archetype to run in any meta ever. I think it actually fits a lot better in Nat decks, but there's definitely room for it here. I hated to hear that you got sniped from Smeargle, because Smeargle is how you fill out all of these hazards a little more clearly. So that is tragic. Smeargle would have fit really well on this team. Unfortunately, it went early. I would have probably grabbed it, honestly. Like, I would have grabbed Meloetta later because I think a lot of people sleep on it. And probably picked up Cyclozar and Smeargle somewhere around after Staraptor, or even before Staraptor. Zoroark's too important to this team to not have. But yeah, everything else, I think it could have fit over that. What do I even say about Terra Normal? This is my favorite way to run Normal. I usually prefer Normal Ursaluna to Ursaluna Blood Moon, just because a lot of Normal types tend to be special attackers, as we're seeing on here. So normally Ursaluna Regular fits the role a little better to help break on the physical side. But Ursaluna Blood Moon also gets an ability that hits ghost types, so I think it's not horrible there. I heard through the grapevine that Iron Jugulis was only ever going to be Terra Normal, which I respect. And I also see what you're doing, because you picked up a Pokemon that has initial stab that hits both ghost and fighting types super effectively. So I really appreciate that pickup. I think it makes a lot of sense. I have a suggestion for you, and normally don't get this specific with suggestions, but out the gate, drop Porygon Z, or Porygon 2 if you don't want the Terra Cap. Pick up the Dunsparce. You're going to want the second rocker. You're never going to run rocks on Terrapagos. No one is going to respect rocks on Terrapagos. And it's going to be like your opponents are going to run Sashes against you. They're going to run, like, they're going to bring their Pokemon like Talonflame. They're not going to bring Boots. Definitely you need another rocker. Unfortunately, your options are very limited to like Blissey and Wigglytuff and the Dunsparce. I think the Dunsparce is one of the best Terra Captains. Even with Terra attacks, I know Jugulis is probably going to Terra more often than not, but I think the Dunsparce would fit so well on the bottom of this team. These two are too redundant, in my opinion. You already have a special attacker at base 90 speed with Meloetta. You don't need PZ. I think the Dunsparce would fit so well on this team. Even being Terra over one of these two, I think would be fantastic. But if you never used the Dunsparce, message me about it. It's like my favorite Pokemon of the generation. But I'll stop blabbering about that. Go into the rest of the team. Terrapagos is one of the best Pokemon in the game. With one of the most consistent Rapid Spinners. Normally I'd be mad that you didn't have more removal, but you don't need more than Terrapagos 9 times out of 10. Blood Moon, you know, gives you that ground type to hit the steels and rocks on the opposing team. That would be annoying. Otherwise, although I don't know that we've seen very many rock types outside of Boulder, so that's kind of funny. Meloetta, just really solid special attacker, not weak to fighting type moves. Offers a little bit of pressure into certain things, so, and that you wouldn't hit well otherwise with Psyshock, so that's nice. Staraptor gives you, I think gives you Defog. I don't know. I never remember what does and doesn't because I've been in Nat decks lately. But it gives you a good flying type to hit the fightings that threaten the entirety of your team otherwise. So I like that a lot. Zoroark is, in my opinion, necessary on mono normal draft teams because everybody's just going to be running fighting coverage. Zoroark is going to make them second guess every time they click a fighting move until they figure out where the Zoroark is. So I love the amount of uncertainty this guy has. Now, will he have to be brought to every game? Probably. Just to keep the facade up that they don't want to look dumb and click a fighting move into a normal type, or, you know, a ghost type. But I think it's so good on a team like this. I love it. This was my favorite guy to run on a Terra normal team before. Grafaiai, I think, fits well. Another fighting, quote unquote, resist. Gives you some utility in Prankster, stops things from setting up all over you because it has the Encore. Ditto, another Pokemon I think is relatively necessary on a mono normal team, just to take your opponent's Pokemon that try to set up on you and Uno reverse card them. Jugulis, you know, I've already been over. I love the fact that you drafted something that hits both. Now, the problem is you got to land Hurricanes, but I believe the Terra Normal team, you know, you should get good karma for running Terra Normal, so you should land every Hurricane this season. And if you don't, it's like a like a war crime against you. Arbalva, I think, is a fantastic low tier normal. Grass is always a nice type to have. You know, you can't really flex every one of these. I love seeing that 10 right there. That's so funny. You know, not every normal type has a secondary. Like, you can't ever get a steel type with mono normal. You could technically get a fairy with like Wigglytuff. I wish you'd got Cyclozar because it's such a good secondary spinner. The speed tier would be really, really nice on this team. Trying to think of things here. It's really hard to get a flying resist because you'd have to do like, is there even a normal rock type? I'm trying to think. I don't think so. So you'd have to do like a normal electric, which is not optimal either. Yeah, it's hard to fill some of these slots. Some of them just don't exist. Normal water is like Bibarel. So, and yeah, like Pot Roar here, it's not really doing a whole lot for you. Fire is nice for the extra steel coverage, so maybe over PZ or something, but overall, I love Terra Normal. I'm not gonna fault you for any of the flaws because the flaws are inherent to the meme. I wish there was more of a like screen setter. I don't know that there's a better screen setter that's a normal type. Maybe there is. There's not one coming to mind. I wish you could have got Smeargle because it would have went so well here. If Smeargle drops, you need to pick it up in a heartbeat. And then please, 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 for the sake of everything, replace one of the Porygons. Probably Z doesn't make very much sense on this team with the Dunsparce, or get something in here like a Wigglytuff or even a Blissey just to force more like physical coverage on special mons, and then you can take advantage with Staraptor. But yeah, I'm personally biased, and I am not moving you from the top of S tier. I don't care what anybody says. I hope you win it all. Okay, second to last team, we have the Georgia Vulpix by Milkavi. I'm not quite sure with the font on the screen. This team looks so fun. So I would say number one team I would take out of all of these teams would be the mono normal team. That's just my favorite archetype of all time. So I'm gonna demerit you for stealing Smeargle. Not really. But if I had to pick any other team to use, it would honestly probably be this one, because this just looks really funny to run. I think there's a little bit of redundancy in here, a little bit. But by and large, I really enjoy this. So I saw the Landorus, Terra Landorus Incarnate first pick. I think it was cheaper than, don't quote me, I think it might have been cheaper or right near the same price as Therian, which is insane because I don't think it's complex banned. Because I was looking around and I was like, okay, it's a sand team with other sand mons. This is probably Sand Force, right? But as far as I could tell, it's Sheer Force. So that means, you know, you have the option to run physical Sand Force with Earthquake, and you actually still get like an insane buff. And you can run physical Rock Slide or Stone Edge and get a big buff from Sand Force as well. So that's really cool. And mix sets can also take advantage of either. So I like that. Double Fairy here is a bit redundant. I would say you don't really need both of these. You can kind of pick your poison. I do like having the water in Primarina. I know you don't get Wish Pass, but this team is kind of set up to come in and burn and, you know, not not take a ton of time to win. So I would say I'm leaning keep Primarina, replace Clefable. That's just personal preference though. Tyranitar, you know, standard Sand Setter. I like it a lot. With Landorus is very funny. But the fact that you have two other Sand Rush Pokemon at the end is also great because you've got a Spinner and Sandslash if Serena has a bad matchup. But I've been preaching Houndstone for a while now. I know a lot of times when you see it, it's a really annoying fluffy set because it can run like Nightshade, it can run Pain Split. It just gets a lot of stuff that keeps it super bulky. It's probably the most underrated spin blocker if I had to put it out there. Your team is not incredibly like hazard diverse. You've just got rocks, and then if you bring Sandslash, you have the option of spikes. But I do still like this as your solid spin blocker that could also run Sand Rush, and the fact that it can Terra is huge because you could run like Terra Fight Body Press to stay bulky but get really boosted hits, and also like Terra Ghost is always, you know, you're gonna do some big damage with Poltergeist and Shadow Sneak. But also just the sweeping set, you just Terra to give yourself extra secondary coverage into whatever the opponent's Ghost resist is. So I like that a lot. And then you keep going with the offenses here with Lucario, double dance, like setting up either way you want. You've got Serena with offensive pressure alongside really reliable spinning. And then Oricorio with Terra, which means it can be any type. Now, these two I love as low tier Terra captains. They're going to be fighting Landorus for that Terra slot, but Landorus doesn't necessarily need it every week. So the other Pokemon I've talked about really want to Terra. Things like Iron Crown love it. Landorus can be self-sufficient without the Terra. Just having Terra Water on the list makes it like people don't want to click Ice Beam into it, and it just two-shot them anyway. So this is the one scenario where I think these low tiers could actually do a lot of work. Terra Oricorio gets boosted Revelation Dances at the cost of losing its only stab other than flying. So that's not bad. Having a Quiver Dancer on this team I think looks pretty solid. And then Houndstone, we've already been over that Terra. So I think that this is a team that has a lot of flexibility. Mandibuzz is a little bit of a momentum sink, though. I'm looking at this. It is a good defensive core with one of these fairies. I still think the two of them are unnecessary together. But honestly, I would almost say you could take these three, replace them with more like temporary bulk that also offers more offensive pressure. Primarina does, but the other two not really. And just have a hyper offensive team that has Smeargle with whatever hazards of the day you need, whatever utility you need. And then just go crazy. D-Dance T-Tar, Calm Mind, or just, you know, super strong Landorus. And just, you know, set up until it goes down, bring in the next one, set up, set Sand, get Houndstone in. I think this team functions best offensively. And the problem with that is you're really relying actually on the Smeargle webs right now because your base speeds are very low. I think this might be the lowest average speed we've seen in the draft. You're just really kind of lacking because Landorus top speed means anything base like 116 or higher can run modest and get away with it unless you run a Scarf or you get a speed boost. So that's not great. I know you facilitate a little bit of that with the double Sand Rush, but Sand is not always going to be up, so it's a little more difficult in that regard. So I would definitely say if you're going to make any moves, I would get some more speed in here somewhere around that 115 at least, if not up to the 130. Would be really nice. And then I said a little Hazard Drought earlier, but you do have Smeargle, so if you really wanted T-Spikes or Webs, you have the opportunity to. It's just Smeargle, it's hard to run. You know, if you have a hazard you want to get up, it's good, but it can be difficult. I think this team is another one that kind of lacks in type diversity a bit. The double fairy that do the same thing is still bothering me, and then no poison means T-Spikes is going to eat this team alive, because unless Serena is Boots, then and Clef is Magic Guard, then you have Primarina, Tyranitar, your Sash is going to get broken. And then, yeah, T-Spikes is going to annoy these two trying to be bulky. If you Terra Landorus, suddenly it can get T-Spiked. So I do worry about that a little bit. No Psychic just makes certain matchups a little worse. It looks like you're okay into most of the types, though. And then your only fairy resist being technically Oricorio is not the best. That means Landorus is more likely to lean like a Terra Poison more often than not, which you definitely don't want to run that every time because Terra Ground is what's really going to be doing the damage, or Terra Flying, Terra Blast is really going to be pumping. So I would say your team sorely wants a poison type somewhere. I don't know if it's over Mandy, I don't know if it's over Clefable, but if you made that one swap, I think it would help a lot. And then your team is relatively Scald weak, but with Primarina, I think you're okay. Serena could run like a Covert Cloak if you really wanted, and then Mandibuzz. So overall decent. I like the Sand a lot, but I think there's also a couple weaknesses with this team with some of the decisions that were made that could be cleaned up. And if you wanted to go opposite of my suggestion, if you wanted to go less offense instead of more, you could swap out Oricorio Sandslash, maybe something else like that offense, and get a little more bulk in here with your poison, maybe with a Psychic or a Dragon to help really fill out this resistance profile. Actually, not a Dragon, because you're already a little weak to Ice and Fairy, but some other Pokemon to help be a little more bulky without being super redundant on typings. So definitely interesting. The triple bird also kind of weird because Landorus isn't weak to the electric, and I guess technically Fire Oricorio isn't weak to ice, but if this was any of the other Oricorios, it would struggle into ice. So I do think Mandy and Clef are kind of the odd ones out, and with these two swapped around, I think this team would be very scary to deal with. It is already, but I just think those two stand out to me as kind of weak links. Otherwise, though, I would say this team is very solid, has a lot of decent win conditions, has a lot of opportunities to win. So I will put it in the most crowded tier. but I will put it at the bottom. I do think it has some slight advantage over these in B, but maybe not to the point of going up further than that. Mainly if these two get moved. Actually, I'd say if those two don't get moved, just personal preference, I would put it at the top of B instead. Oh, and I actually just looked, and you actually have 3 points sitting around if I'm not mistaken. So Clef, Mannybuds, and 3 points gives you 29 to work with. So you could get something crazy like a Deoxys Speed in here. You could get whatever the strongest poison type is left on the board. You could load that up. I think with just a couple transactions, this team ascends straight to like A+ tier, to be honest. All right, and last but not least, we have the Motown Revavrooms, coached by Ivory Coast. This was the wheel pick, and your round one was Terra Garganackle, which is very interesting to me. I do think Garganackle and Knucklestack both have a solid place in draft. I don't know if Terra 1 is the place for that, but hey, pick 1 is the place for that. But I gotta respect the pick because it's pretty solid. Iron Treads is probably one of the best hazard setter, remover, and momentum gaining mons in the game that can be surprisingly offensive when you need it to be. And then you have a decent, bulky core within the Rotom Heat that can also exert a little bit of offense. You've got the Almamola, endlessly bulky, obnoxious. Terra Sinistra, probably top 5 favorite Pokemon of the generation, one of my top 5. With Terra, it becomes a lot better. Terra Seal is usually my favorite thing to run on it. But Terra Water is always good. Terra Ghost is decent. Fairy is fine. I love it. I think it's one of the best Pokemon around. And then you got solid both fast and bulky offense in the Latios and the Iron Hands, two great Pokemon in draft that always end up pulling their weight. So big fan of that. Whimsicott giving you Prankster to help you deal with things like the weather, helps you deal with setup to encore any threats. And then Overquill, a little bit expensive for what it does on this team. I really think Quillfish Hisui could fill the same role, because Overquill, the thing it has on its baby form is it can run item flexibility and it offers a little more offense, but usually it does best on rain teams. And I don't know if I'm looking at this team if I would say rain. I guess Whimsy probably gets Rain Dance if I had to guess. Okay, no, Whimsy doesn't, but half of your team does. So Overquill can set its own rain, but still, that's a lot less reliable. So I would say not my absolute favorite, because Rain also has anti-synergy with the Rotom. So looking at this team, your resistance profile looks very good. You've drafted pretty much every Pokemon type that is quote-unquote necessary, except for flying, but you have double levitate. Your ground weak is a Terra Captain, one of them is. So I think you're okay there. I think where I'm getting stuck here, I've been meaning to analyze this further. There are Pokemon that get taken advantage of in draft, like Pokemon that you can build around setting up to win because your opponent can't do anything about it. They're using a Pokemon that absolutely can't break something or do something. Your team has more of these type of Pokemon than the average team. So looking at it, Garganackle, very strong. Iron Defense Body Press is great. It has decent enough attack to do damage. And Salt Cure makes your opponent run Covert Cloak. That way they don't take damage from it. Problem is, when they run Covert Cloak and they switch in their bulky water, use Salt Cure, they take barely any damage and they don't take chip damage. So suddenly they can set up back on you. So it becomes this thing where Garganackle goes from being very strong to a liability unless you have the proper Terra type, the proper tools to deal with Pokemon without Salt Cure, which in general is Garganackle's best tool. So that's a frustrating part of Garganackle. That's usually why I actually prefer Knucklestack, because people tend to not prep for the baby form, and then when it shows up, Salt Cure actually does a ton of work. So this Garganackle pick is entirely dependent on how many of your opponents respect Covert Cloak. Usually the way to get around that is to run knockoff spam. Your team has a little bit of knockoff between, I think that might be a cut move from Almamola. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Olive doesn't get knocked. So you're entirely reliant on Iron Treads knocking off the Covert Cloak. And if your opponent plays it smart, keep switching things around, you're never going to get rid of the cloak, and Garg is never going to be able to make as much of a difference as it wants to. That's the first issue. Other issue, Iron Treads without a boosting item can be subbed on by a lot of Pokemon like grass types, certain water types, because it has to run Wild Charge, Supercell Slam, Ice Spinner. It needs a lot of room for flex slots while also trying to fit Earthquake, Spin, Rocks. So that's another thing. Alomomola, one of the top Pokemon to get subbed on and set up on, in my opinion. It can flip turn, maintain momentum, but that doesn't stop the fact that the opponent can get free turns off of it, although it can also benefit you. I think Alomomola is a Pokemon that definitely, the coach has to definitely handle it, like be adept with Alomomola, and it's fine, but it can also very much be a liability. Sinistcha. This is another Pokemon that I actually think doesn't want the Covert Cloak, because Sinistcha relies on getting Machagacha burns to deal with physical attackers with its standard Calm Mind sets. And if your opponent's already running a Covert Cloak for Garganacl, then they're probably going to want that same cloak to deal with Sinistcha, so they don't have to worry about the burns, don't have to worry about Spadef drops, and they can set up alongside Sinistcha. So I think that part's a little difficult as well. Latios and Iron Hands, they don't really have that much that can deal with them. I think both of them are entirely self-sufficient. They don't fit the same problem. Rotom, Dragon types with Substitute really give this guy headaches because his dual stab is resisted by every dragon in the game. Well, not every dragon in the game, but a lot of dragons. And then a sub on any dragon faster than base 86 means you can't burn it and you can't Thunderwave it any longer. Or a Lumberry even is all they may need to get +1. And then, like, if it's a Haxorus, which I don't think got drafted, then Moldbreaker Earthquake just threatens to do 400% to you. So that's just one thing standing out to me a bit. I guess Moldbreaker Earthquake in general scares this whole team outside of the double grasses. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't know that there's any prominent Moldbreakers right now, but there definitely could be. Because I've already forgotten what we've been over. There's Ogerpon, but it doesn't get Earthquake. It gets like Stomping Tantrum or something. And then Whimsicott can also get taken advantage of. It can obviously Encore, but there are dark types that can kind of go around it. Although I guess technically it does get Infiltrator, Moonblast, so maybe not. Never mind. Whimsicott is okay. Overall, though, I would say this team has a lot of things that can take advantage of it. So I worry a little bit about how it will actually perform. Special attack breaking is pretty much entirely relegated to Latios and Sinistcha, along with Rotom to an extent. But those three alone are your only real special offense outside of like offensive Whimsicott, which is very hit or miss in my experience. And then your speed is also capped at Whimsicott, which is okay, but usually I like a little something else up here. And then this gap between 106 and 86 means base 100s are going to feel pretty comfortable running a lot of bulk. So I do worry about that a little bit, especially if they already anticipate Rotom to run Scarf, or if they anticipate Treads to be Booster. I think that's a little difficult. Another thing this team actually enjoys, now the more that I look at it, is actually Electric Terrain, because Hands loves the free boost. An Electric Seed on something like Sinistcha would go pretty hard. And then Iron Treads also appreciates getting the free stat boost. So just a little something stands out. I'm not saying draft Pincurchin. I think Pincurchin's a fraud. But if you had a fast electric type that could set that terrain, that would be kind of cool. Maybe not actually competitive though. So don't take that as that true word of advice. Overall though, I think this team is decent. I think it just lacks a little bit of immediate breaking powder outside of these two. And it has a lot of things that can be covered for by just a few items and a few sets. So I worry a little bit there. Overall though, I still think I would put it, actually, the more I've thought about it, I would move this up, probably put it here at the bottom of B, but I would also move this team up from C. I think it's worth upgrading. I don't think there are any teams that are worse than the rest. To be honest, I think this team still had enough to work both of these teams. I just think they have more glaring flaws and more things that can have advantage taken of them, and maybe less potential win cons for the long game. If I'm being realistic with this team, it would go somewhere else, but you know, you can kind of get a general idea of where I'm putting things. Once again, ignore the ad on the side. I don't know what's going on over there. But yeah, with that, this is where everybody landed, in my opinion. And once again, this is just my personal opinions. I have certain Pokemon I really like. I have certain Pokemon I really don't like. And so that's going to play a part into this. I think every single team on this board can make it to playoffs. It all depends on the play, how you build your team to deal with your opponent's teams, you know, is a very important part of this. It's more than just what you draft, it's how you use what you drafted. So maybe I'm not seeing the vision with some of these teams that I put in B tier, and they're actually like S+ tier, right? And people know exactly how to use them better than I could ever do it. So I'm excited to see. I'm going to try to watch as many games as I can, and I wish you all good luck. If you want to talk transactions with me, feel free to reach out on Discord. I go by Zanzand. And yeah, good luck in your season, and I will see you all again soon.